All right. With that, we go to the report of the Citizen Advisory Board. Ray, you're up.
Well, my first act as new member on the Commissioners Board was to be on the Citizens Advisory Board meeting. So I enjoyed that role. First time on the big table, big person seat. Here. I think it was correctly summarized that a lot of what we're going to see today was presented to the CAB and was positively received by them, and their actions on the motions before them kind of reflected their approval of the direction that was being presented. So rather than me describe it, I'll let the people who are here to tell us about it. And I will ask all the same questions I asked last time.
That's fair. Okay, so with that, we move on to the minutes. But who's going to be our official motion?
I suggest Ray is the.
I suggest Ray.
Well, for 6 months.
That's the natural.
Take that too. After a while.
All right.
Yeah.
If you do it with a little bit more flair.
Claire, oh man.
Never mind, I want it back. I'm gonna do better.
So we did the suggested motion under 5.
Yes, yes, you would, please.
Move that the RMLD Board of Commissioners approve the November 15th, 2023 open session meeting minutes as presented on the recommendation of the General Manager and Board Secretary.
Okay, is that seconded?
Second.
Just for clarity, I am the board secretary. So, all right, so any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried 5-0. All right, we go to an update and release of executive session minutes. So in the executive session, we have, there's a lot of minutes we are going to approve. We're releasing them. Are we releasing the minutes, some of those minutes, or just, okay?
Well, I mean, the approval is to release.
Okay.
So we reviewed them. We looked at the appropriateness given where we are and where they were.
Okay. Some of them go back to 2014.
Many of
I
them.
was here. Mr. Talbot was here also on some of those. So we will approve them and release them on from the executive session on that. So that'll be in the executive session to be released. Okay. Move on to the PERMA insurance review.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Hopefully everyone, yeah, okay, now I have the mic.
There we go.
Okay, so my name is Nicole Magnifico. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Utilities Risk Management Association. Can I have the clicker? Did you already give it to me? So I'm like actually nervous. It's like I've never presented before. This season. Oh my God, what am I doing? So I've been here since July 2020. But prior to that, I was the claims liaison for PERMA. I just worked with the brokerage firm that PERMA works with. So I've actually been supporting the public power community from an insurance perspective for 10 years. So I've been around and I'm very familiar with all of the PERMA policies. And so the reason why PERMA is so special, this is in your materials, is because we're a nonprofit trade association founded by the Northeast Public Power Association back in 1997. And our mission is to provide risk management, insurance procurement, education services to the public power community in the Northeast. We're also, like I said, we're a nonprofit and we're governed by a board of directors who are all made up of our member utilities. So they're representatives from our members. I'm not going to go over the next 2 slides. They're about our captive insurance programming, in which Reading Municipal Light Department is an active member of both of our captives. I guess just a couple of highlights. I'm such an insurance person. Like, I'm not going to go over it and then I'm just going to talk about it. So a couple of highlights. The reason why our captives are so unique compared to like folks that go out and buy insurance from the commercial marketplace is because our captives are very restrictive with membership and eligibility. So you have to be a municipal or some kind of quasi-government organization that's tax exempt in order to be a member of our captives. And that allows our captives to be tax exempt insurance companies, which is very, very favorable to our members because it's allowed us to have long-term rate stabilization. That's really the big benefit. So this slide that you see here is on PUMIC. That is the Public Utility Mutual Insurance Company, and that provides our liability coverages to our members, which Reading is a member of. And the next slide is about our property insurance captive, Public Energy Insurance Company, which Reading Municipal Light Department is also a member. This is just our org chart. It kind of helps our members. This is the presentation you have is like a condensed version of when we go out and meet with our members and talk through who we are and what we do and how we can serve them. So this is our org chart. It explains how we interact with our captives and then the other divisions that we have. So we consider ourselves to have 3 divisions. Our first division is to run our captive programs. Our second division is to provide education and training and other risk management services like contractual reviews, indemnification, additional insured, all of that stuff, certificate of insurance management, lots of really fun insurance jargon. And then our third division is if we cannot place something within our captive and we have to place it in the commercial marketplace, we will oversee that process to make sure that that the premiums are in line with what we see, that the coverage forms are the best that we can procure on behalf of the member. We review the coverages and we work with the broker to make those commercial placements. The next slide is, I don't know why it's like this, but it's just a list of our members. You'll see a lot of folks that you're familiar with. The majority of our membership is out of Massachusetts. And I think that's just because Massachusetts is such a public power friendly state, whereas many of our other states that we work with, like Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, have much less public power. Also, because PERMA was founded by NEPA, which was founded in the state of Massachusetts, I think we've just always had a long history here. And the majority of the traditional electric utility MLPs in Massachusetts are members of PERMA. And this is really why we're here, is to kind of talk through the insurances that you purchase through PERMA and how, you know, I'm here to provide any information or answer any questions that you might have about these insurances. So I'm just going to provide a quick overview of each coverage, and then, you know, certainly let me know or jump in if you have questions about a particular insurance. So our auto program is covered by our captives. That is really great because, like I said, when something is placed in our captive, we have long-term rate stabilization, and we're able to also control the coverages that we're providing. So our coverages are always comparable or better to what you can buy in the commercial marketplace. If there's ever an opportunity for us to enhance our coverage offerings at a reasonable price, then we do that. So with auto, one thing that I want to point out, I think it's important for the board to know, is that even though your limit for auto liability says $500,000, the excess liability policy that RMLD purchases actually sits over that limit. So that's very standard. Anytime, even if you're in your own personal life, if you purchase what we call like a primary underlying policy and you purchase an umbrella policy, it sits over that primary policy. So you're extending your limits.
A rookie question. When
Sure.
you talk about auto, we're talking vehicle, so it covers the trucks.
Yes, yes.
Okay, just
Yep, absolutely.
rookie
So
question here. That's
no, you got it. So auto liability is going to be instances where an RMLD employee is operating a motor vehicle and damages property.
you don't have
yeah.
to explain it for me. I just want to make sure we were talking the trucks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the reason why that $500,000 limit can be concerning if you didn't understand that the excess that's over it is because there are so many circumstances where if you're operating a motor vehicle, you could injure or, you know, potentially even worse to a third party. So we want to make sure that you're fully covered for that exposure. And your excess policy is $25 million limit. So plenty of auto insurance. And then of course, we also insure the physical damage to your trucks, your private passenger vehicles. So if you have damage to your fleet here at RMLD, then that would be covered by our auto insurance policy as well. The next policy that you purchase is crime. Crime is an interesting policy. It's like one of the oldest insurance policies available. You know, a long time ago, this really was meant to cover break-ins when folks were, you know, when it was more likely that you had cash on hand and folks were coming in and breaking and entering. This policy would still be triggered in the event that that happened. But more likely what we see for claims are employee theft claims. These are going to be like long-term embezzlement type claims where it's usually a small amount of money that's taken month after month after month and gone unseen. And then the other big trigger for crime is social engineering. Social engineering is another term for a phishing scam. So that's when an email, somebody's Outlook or email has been compromised. And so now you have a bad actor that's actually sitting in that person's email box, kind of impersonating that individual. And maybe they are asking another employee to pay a bill that's fraudulent or to go buy gift cards or something of that nature that's going to have an economic advantage to the bad actor and an economic disadvantage to RMLD. So social engineering is also endorsed onto your crime policy. And that's an important coverage to have.
Quick question. Assets, does it come, when I say assets, like materials, so the stuff is highly valuable today, does that cover that? So if someone came in and say borrowed a real cable that might be worth $50,000, is that covered?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an employee theft standpoint, so if an employee has stolen assets, and I've seen this before, selling it on eBay or something like that, that would be covered there. But yes, if another, like a third party just came in and stole your stuff, that would absolutely be triggered under crime. So you'd have the coverage there. Could also be covered under property. So there's kind of duplicate coverage for theft just because of the nature of theft. The next policy is cyber. These in my terms, like cyber is a newer policy, even though it's pretty much everyone has a cyber policy at this point in time. And if they don't, they're trying to get one because it's such an important coverage. But, you know, before 10 years ago, no one was really talking about cyber insurance. So this is an evolving risk that everybody has to face. And unfortunately, municipals and utilities are both industries that are highly targeted from a cyber standpoint. And so to be a municipal utility, you're like double whammy. It's even more concerning. For the most part, the majority of the time, you're not looking at grid disturbances with cyber. There's so many checks and balances in place to not allow for somebody to be able to access the grid through the network. But what you're really talking about is ransomware exposures where your systems are frozen and there's ransomware attack on your systems. You don't have access to your systems. And so you're down. You're just operationally down and you need to rely on your backups. And of course, if there's a ransom, this policy is going to negotiate with that bad actor if they're legally allowed to, because in some cases, you're not allowed to if the bad actor is engaged with a terrorist organization. So I know I'm getting into the weeds there, but from a cyber standpoint, one of the biggest threats is ransomware. And if that was the case, your cyber insurer would negotiate the ransom with the bad actor, try to get the settlement to be as low as possible, exchange cryptocurrency or whatever it might be. There's a lot of there's a lot of really niche and interesting expertise that comes along with cyber claims. So it's very important when you're selecting your cyber insurer that you're going with someone that has the expertise in place. And so Tokyo Marine Kiln is a great placement for our folks here. We just recently increased that cyber limit from 1 million to 3 million, which is consistent with just unfortunately the average cost of a cyber claim nowadays is now just over $3 million. So that threat has really been evolving over the last 5 years or so, especially after COVID. It's been a big evolving threat after COVID because of all the folks that work from home and are traveling. Any questions on cyber? Okay. So public officials liability, this is a very important coverage for the room here. This is going to be the policy that covers our public officials, elected officials that oversee a public organization such as yourselves and the CAB. Of course, it also extends coverage to the entity itself, so RMLD, any employees within the entity. The difference is when you're a public official, you know, you're either volunteering your service or you're getting paid a small stipend. And if this coverage were not in place and the commission were to be sued, you would have to hire an attorney yourself to defend yourself. And so that would be a huge burden for folks that are serving on the commission. And so this policy has a $3 million limit. It's a sufficient limit to have in place, and this is going to protect the elected officials that are serving the organization in the event that there's an allegation of what we call an error or omission, which is a very broad way to say pretty much anything that could be alleged to have an economic damage. So policy decisions, claim examples could even be, like an open meeting violation. So you didn't give enough notice to the public that you were going to have a public meeting. Something as simple as that. There are lots of examples of public officials' claims, but rest assured, we have the coverage in place for you.
I've got a question on that. I mean, today I signed 2 indemnification agreements for the 2 members. Can you see about my indemnification is somewhere out there somewhere? I have a feeling mine was signed.
Yeah, because it was way back when.
Yeah,
We'll take that. That's a good
it
question.
may have been chiseled out.
Might be in the box down. An action item, yes.
The next coverage item is employment practices liability insurance. It's a mouthful, but all you're really saying is these are going to be claims that are coming from the employees of RMLD alleging discrimination. And when I say discrimination, I'm talking about everything from sexism to ageism to racism to everything in between, ADA violations. There's so many examples of employment practices claims. The neat part is it also includes third-party coverage. So if a third party was to allege that RMLD was discriminating against them in some way, that would get picked up under this policy as well. The general and excess liability will tackle together. So these are going to be your typical claims for bodily injury or property damage. This most simplest way is if somebody slips and falls in your lobby and gets injured because, there was water on the floor or something of that nature, or if somebody slips and falls in your parking lot because it was not, there was ice and you didn't tend to it quickly. So these are allegations against the organization that a third party has sustained a bodily injury or some kind of property damage and that it was the negligence of RMLD. This is the most common claim that we see at PERMA. These claims are, they come in often because we're representing so many members. And so what we typically do is assist with the investigation to determine negligence. And then if negligence was present, we work to settle the claim. If the organization was not negligent, then we work to defend the claim. Fiduciary liability is the organization's responsibility to administer employee benefits. That would include retirement plans. So there's typically an obligation to all public entities to have a policy in place to protect the retirement plans, or what we call ERISA plans. And so that's what this policy does. It adheres to that compliance requirement. If there was ever a claim that there was mismanagement of the retirement fund or that somebody was not enrolled in health insurance or something of that nature and they should have been, this would be the policy that picks up that exposure. Inland marine contractors equipment is very similar to auto. It's just not your road vehicles. It's other contractors equipment that are getting picked up. And then your property policy is going to cover your buildings, really everything that you own but your fleet. So fleet is under auto, and then property is going to capture your substations, any generation equipment, your buildings, your warehouses, your garages, things like that. It also includes everything in the building. So we like to say building coverage is for the building itself, and property coverage is for anything that would fall out if you picked up the building, tipped it upside down and shook it. Everything that falls out is property. So we call that property coverage. And you can see there's a very, very large limit there for the property program. And that's because this is a group policy. There are other members that are insured within it, very geographically diverse across the Northeast.
So on that particular item, I think we've all seen the bridge get hit by the boat, right?
Oh.
Are we covered if that's a mutually used fund? Right now, we're investing in more substations, which,
Yeah.
again, you need to replace that. Is that a like replacement value? And I know a lot of times we always get the, in insurance policies, like, well, that's age, that's been there for 30 years. So you're going to get 1/30th of today's value. Is there anything in that policy that operates like that? And are we going, if you lost our substation for whatever reason, says there's some dramatic event. Would that be something that policy would cover? Or is there, I might be getting way too into the weeds, but are we covered enough with our assets? And they were mutually insured $250 million. Would that cover replacement imagine some kind of a catastrophic event like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, first answer is the valuation. So you're right, there is actual cash value and there's replacement cost. Your property policy is a replacement cost policy. So if you have a substation that's 20 years old and it burns to the ground and it's going to cost $20 million to replace it, that's the value that's what you get is your check for $20 million. The only exception to that is if you decide not to replace the asset. So if it's a substation that's 20 years old, you have no plan on replacing it, then you're not going to get replacement cost. You're going to get actual cash value. So you still get to cash in on the asset, but you're not going to get the replacement cost.
Follow up on that. So if you decide you're going to replace it, but you're going to do a different technology than the generation system that was destroyed, or if you want to move it to a different place, like what if, potentially there's a flood and you want to move it away from the new flood zone or something. Are you allowed to do that? Yeah,
if you have a total loss, like let's just use substation because it's a great example. So if your substation is now in a flood zone, like an unfavorable flood zone, and you have a total loss and you want to move it, you'll absolutely have, under the policy, they'll let you move it. They don't care very much where it gets replaced as long as it's within your, as long as you're still going to continue to own it, it's within your territory. If it was a partial loss, so that kind of gets in the weeds. If it's only a partial loss, they're not going to pay for you to tear down the whole thing and move it just to remediate a potential future loss. So that is a caveat of the policy. That's standard with insurance policies. It would have to be a total loss if you do want to move it. The other question you had was about the limit and the exposure because it's a group policy. Right, so it's an excellent question. So the limit of 250 million is a per occurrence limit. So in the event that there was an ice storm today and a windstorm in 3 days and, a wildfire or some kind of other fire in a week, that per occurrence limit resets with every event. So it is plenty of coverage. And also our group members are geographically diverse from Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New York. I always kind of joke, and it's not super funny, but the only way that you could really foresee an event that would take out all of our systems at once and we wouldn't have sufficient coverage would be like a meteor. And if that happened, none of us would be here. So nobody would need insurance ever again. Aside from that, I mean, you're not going to have a windstorm that hits coastal Massachusetts and also hits, upper New York in the same event. It's just not practical. It's not going to happen. So yeah, we do feel very comfortable. We do also analyze that limit once every couple of years and just make sure based on the amount of exposure that we have, that it's a sound limit.
Speaking of the limits, you mentioned that the cyber limit changed. Have any of the other limits changed? I assume just looking at this because we're renewing. So
yeah,
anything else change?
You can let them know that we're gonna.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do the public comment.
So we're going to increase the public officials from 3 million to 5 million. So we're going to do that midterm as of April 1st. And that's just because of you have the CAB and you have the BOC. Did I say right? So you have two boards really. So we just want to make sure that there is enough limit to go around in the event that a very large claim transpired and you needed a bigger limit. Other than the cyber, none of the other limits have changed. The excess liability limit being 25 million is a very large limit of liability. At this point, there really isn't a need to change that limit. Massachusetts is subject to, or Massachusetts municipals are subject to the Mass Tort Claims Act, which essentially says that municipals have a tort cap of $100,000 that they would be subjected to if they were found to be negligent. There are exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, when we do receive a claim, we're able to negotiate that claim within $100,000. For some circumstances, if there's gross negligence or something egregious occurs, that tort cap won't apply. The last coverage on there is just railroad liability, and that's because you do have an MBTA track in town and you need to maintain your lines. And so the railroad does require you to purchase this policy to protect them in the event that in your normal course of maintenance, you have an error and you damage some of their railroad. That is all that I have for you. Does anyone have any questions?
So John Hill here. So if we have tree trimmers that are contracted by us doing work in our direction. Right? So if they were to have a claim for their damaged property, damaged vehicle, they're gonna accident. Is there any possibility that RMLD could be involved in that? Because they're gonna go, go for the deepest points, right? So would any of these coverages cover something like that?
That's a great question. So this happens all the time. Many of our members contract out their tree trimming services. And so what we do from a risk management perspective is we look at that contract before you place it with the vendor. And so we look at that contract and we make sure that your vendor is carrying enough liability insurance to respond to any claim of negligence. Many times, your customers aren't going to know that it's a contractor who's trimming the trees. They're going to assume that it's RMLD. So they might come to you first with the claim. So we make sure that that contract is very tightly worded so that RMLD receives coverage under the contractor's insurance policy primarily first. Your policy would fall excess to it. So if for some reason you couldn't get coverage under that policy because they didn't pay their bill, they showed us that they had an insurance policy, but they really didn't, something went on of that nature, then your excess liability policy and your general liability policy would be primary. But our goal would be to transfer that risk because it's not your negligence. So that's our first line of defense. You're welcome. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
So I think we'll move forward with your section and then when Ted arrives and then John. So we have two guests that are expected to come here to join us.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Philip. Shall we move on to the next agenda item?
Yes. Good item. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about multi-day storage. We've been working with Form Energy on defining a solution for the service territory. So the solution we've come up with, and we call, I've been schooled on multi-day storage versus long duration storage. Long duration is multiple hours and multi-day is multiple days. So there is an advantage to having multiple days of storage as opposed to hours of storage. We've been working with Form on an iron air battery. It's a 10 megawatt system that would store 10 megawatts of energy for 100 hours. So it's 1,000 megawatt hour battery. And it will help us smooth the transition to net zero electricity and maintain the mission of reliable, low cost and non-carbon electric delivery. And it creates value a few different ways. One is through peak reduction to manage, will offset some of the increasing costs of transmission and capacity on the ISO New England system. It also gives a little more flexibility in intraday arbitrage. So when the price of electricity is low, and particularly when there are a lot of renewables on the grid, it's going to drive prices down. And when those renewables go away, the prices are going to rise. And the idea of having a long duration asset helps you take advantage of those price volatility moments. And it also, the other thing that multi-day storage does that the other the other commercially available storage technologies do not provide is the ability to offset mandatory load reductions in the case of reliability issues on the grid. Also, it gives us the opportunity to create a clean energy hub The Form Energy technology is, fairly cutting edge. Massachusetts wants to be on the forefront of clean energy technology. Form is a Massachusetts company, and RMLD is leading the way on adopting these types of technologies. So we think that sets us up to put RMLD out in front, and also to attract more grant opportunities because of that. First movers get first dibs on money. So from the peak reduction energy arbitrage opportunity, so this chart here is what Form model. We checked this model and we agree with it. As you can see, so the sort of pink area is the imports to our service territory. The black dotted line is our load profile. So as you see it's low in the overnight and it peaks during the day. This particular was modeled for first week of or second week of February. So
see this particular chart on my
It's the
next section completely?
Yeah. No, we got, I think in the package might be backwards.
Go by the thing?
Nope, yeah,
Okay,
and then there it is.
all right, okay. All right, go ahead, go ahead.
So as you can see, we're filling the battery where the pink is over the dotted line. And then we're discharging both the lithium ion and the iron air battery in the dark orange up above. The purple down below is when we're charging the lithium ion battery. So this takes into account that we do have lithium ion batteries, we have solar, and we also have the iron air battery. As you can see, the iron air battery has the capability to discharge over long durations of time, 11 hours, 16 hours, 15 hours, as necessary, and will allow us to kind of smooth out the imports. So we're getting energy from the battery when peaks are occurring, and we're filling it up when our usage is low, thereby levelizing the output.
Before you leave that one, Bill, actually, I think one thing to notice in this, as we have our peaks that we are providing power, the iron battery certainly provides a substantial bunch of that, but there's multiple responses we're taking. I mean, we're using the solar, we're using the lithium ion as well as the iron. So whatever's optimum at the moment are choices you can make.
Mhm.
It's not just that not only the iron we're depending on, although it's providing a substantial benefit.
Yeah.
In this case.
Yeah.
Just want to emphasize the point is multiple responses.
No,
Managing the
right.
peak.
So can I ask
Oh,
two questions on this too? So the solar we're seeing engaged during the middle of the day, obviously
Yeah.
on the Sunday, but there's no charging of any battery associated with the solar.
Not the solar in our territory, because we'll be using it to help meet the peak.
Okay. And then there's also an item in the legend of gas peaker, but I don't see that here. Are we essentially saying this will eliminate the need for a gas peaker?
Yes.
The exception of that on a solar would be like if it's a sunny, mild day on a Sunday, the demand is extremely low.
Yeah.
There's a lot of generation midday.
Yeah.
And it could.
Yes, this is for a winter,
Yeah.
so winter case with high loads.
So it's possible that we could use. The capability exists for solar to charge
Yes.
battery.
Yeah, so we could, and when there's more solar on the grid, it would give us more opportunity to store that. This is modeling just what the community solar projects that we have in the territory right now.
A question. So it's 10 megawatts. I'm assuming it gets set up at a substation. or adjacent to a substation. So it's limited to that feeder distribution out of that substation. You can't transfer this in like you've got multiple circuits, right? Coming out of
Yeah,
that.
so
thing.
the-
So
It'll be near a, yeah, it'll be,
you're high demand. So this isn't all territory. This isn't, I just, it's not all four towns. It's geographically specific to an area. You
it's an
can't
area.
distribute.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It'll be, so to answer your question, yes, it'll be linked to, so we have 17 circuits. It'll probably be linked to 5 or 6 of them. We're still doing the
top,
design work
yeah,
on that.
yeah, big one.
But again, if you do that, then, well, it by itself, it's only 10 megawatts, right? So it won't support the whole thing, but it'll unload some of the other circuits. The intention for us on this particular system, this combined, so the location that we anticipate this one going to would be the part of that 41 acre parcel, of which 16 is usable. It'll take about 9 acres roughly, but it would be in that area on the Route 125/93. So it'll be near the new substation.
Yeah,
And
so
that's
it's in
part
the
of the design as well.
peak. So as you distribute out amongst, you know, I know it's 10 megawatts for 10 hours, but in reality, at
100 hours.
100 hours, but it's 10 megawatts at the end of the
Peak
day. And now I'm taking 5 circuits. Each one of the circuits could be 7 megawatts at a time. So you're talking 35 megawatts of distributed load.
Yeah.
Maybe higher. So it gets dispersed rather quickly.
Yeah.
Amongst that power supply. So it's a math problem, you know, as you figure it out. So I know it says 10 megawatts. It seems like a lot, but when you distribute that 10 over those 5 circuits, it's not as much. You might be getting 1 to 2 megawatts to supplement. So that time frame, it goes 100 hours. That's not 100 hours per circuit. I know it says multi-day, but that peaking over, that's what I'm getting my head around right now.
Yeah, I think in fairness, Bob, part of, there's a lot of modeling that's going on.
Yeah.
There are, and Sam's car's out there, so I'm not sure he'll be.
Yeah. Okay, I might be jumping ahead a little
Yeah,
bit.
we might jump ahead, but the point being is, so there's I think 4 systems that are currently installed right now, and we'll let our guest in a few moments kind of present those systems. But we're all going to learn in terms of 100 hours. Like, what do you do with 100 hours? I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that go into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't charge. Charge time is a little bit slower because anyways. There's a whole bunch of pieces. But the intention for us is to with grant dollars, et cetera. In this particular case, the proposal or what we're planning on is actually owning this asset, because we'll able to. Our investment would be very low relative to the total cost, and part of the reason why when I say the setup, we're presenting this to you now, and there's a 2-step process here. We want to ask for permission to enter into negotiations. There's a window of opportunity for some grant dollars that have come available, and as Bill mentioned earlier, we want to be early to the game there, and the motion is not for the final contract and the final relationship to it. But anyway, all said and done, it'll be adjacent to, it's tended to be co-located with the carbon capture fuel cell. So that whole site, if we're discharging and generating, that could be a potential of 30 megawatts. But there's also an element where if we have low periods and we're running that carbon capture fuel cell, we potentially might be filling this battery system as well. So there's a bunch of use cases that are still to be worked out. Well, I mean, but when I say its basic premise is positive, but we're going to learn together in terms of how to maximize and optimize 100 hours, because nobody's done 100 hours yet. And back to Bob's point, the other thing is there'll be multiple circuits tied into this, and it'll its intention is to take this storage system is just that. It's a storage system. It's not a generator. So we have to charge it in order to discharge it. So what we're really fundamentally doing is time shifting. And that goes back to, that's why a typical peak hour system, the other systems that we are in the process of installing, the 5 megawatt 3-hour systems, those only discharge for 3 hours, then you gotta recharge it. 100 hours is a whole different, it's just a different game.
So the gentleman coming tonight can explain how they wire this thing in and how they wire it out. And
No, he won't be doing that design work. He's gonna spend the technology. our engineers and PLM will do that. That's fine.
That's significant, you know, a tie-in
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, you're-
magnitude is,
You all people, you know
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
it's substation sized. I mean, let's
10
literally,
megawatts.
this is, but meaning you gotta tie into each circuit, it's gotta have protection, it's gotta have everything associated with it, so it's
Data
massive.
links,
It's massive,
communication, fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is,
no joke.
this is not trivial. Good, you finished, I'm sorry.
And then just as a winter reliability resource, was a very interesting analysis that Form had done. This showed, because it really illustrates the issue with winter reliability. So it's somewhat complex. You know, this shows from December to mid-February. This was modeled out in the 2029 to 2030 timeframe. And as you can see, the top is the supply of energy into the system. So the green dotted line at the top is the natural gas capacity coming into New England. The top brown line is the capacity of oil storage in a typical winter. The green line, the green area chart is basically the gas demand for heating in New England, and the tan area chart is the gas demand that goes to making power. So it's not a problem, as you can see, in December, but then in early January, you see the need for power generation from natural gas and heating exceeds the capacity limit. That's when we start drawing down the oil reserve. So that's why the brown line starts to drop. And if you look at the chart below, the stacked bar chart there, the tan bars are power generation from gas generators, which is the majority of generators in New England at this point. And you can see in early January, those do oil. So the oil and gas units start burning oil instead of gas because there's not enough gas to make power. And you can see there's also some red areas. That's where ISO New England, because it is starting to hit the limit of what's available for gas, they're starting to ask people to reduce load. So that means they would call us and say, you need to shed 10% of whatever load you have because the system is in danger of not having enough supply. This goes on, right? So in this scenario, as the winter goes on, and you might be able to refill some of the oil reserves, but probably not. So as as the winter is colder and colder, the heating load is really high, the demand on power generation is really high. You're drawing down that oil reserve to almost nothing, and then there's not a lot left. And that's the fear for winter reliability is hitting this scenario. And in those, you see all those red areas. Those are where we would be called on to shed some load. And in our case, if we have a 10 megawatt, 100 megawatt hour battery, we would be using that battery to help shed the load. So it would be an apparent load shed to ISO New England, but we would be pulling it out of the battery instead of
as opposed to turning customers off.
Yeah. So how we value this is not easy, because how do you value the loss of power? Jason Small in the cab gave us some ideas on how to do that with lost revenue, but I still think it doesn't reflect the loss, the value to people who are being turned off, what the value of that event is.
But our initial investment would be justified on peak shaving.
Yeah.
So that this is additional value, which is what we intend to do with the other battery systems as well. They'd be justified on peak shaving, that they would provide value in the event that we need to do mandatory loads, which has been very rare. But
yeah. So if the question is, why aren't you just putting in another 10 megawatt lithium ion battery? It's because of this multi-day element that also provides some backup in this winter reliability case.
The time window you've chosen is important because one, it's not far away. So, I mean,
Yeah.
Making decisions now and putting things in place in order to manage this, is that these things are not very far off in the horizon. But it's also not so far off that there'll be a shift in the amount of natural gas used for residential heating load as people start moving to more electrical power,
Mhm.
which changes this graph two ways. One is that we will have more natural gas available for natural gas generation. But then we'll need to generate more because there are more people will be wanting electricity for their power. So shutting people off from power is not something we want to do if it's going to home heating. So it reinforces that even if there was to be more natural gas available due to people shifting off natural gas as a fuel.
That's a very good point. So the path forward, we're promoting the project within the Commonwealth. We think this gives us the ability to establish a clean energy hub in RMLD territory. And it really positions us with another component of the in-territory strategy that we've developed. And it also allows us to seek a state grant. The path forward, we're developing a risk mitigation plan. This is not without risks. It's, Bob also pointed out, we need to confirm the land parcel where we are placing it. And then we need to really refine the commercial structure with form, and update the financial models and negotiate a contract with them. Then of course, we will bring those details to you to get the CAB and BOC approved. Any questions
so far?
You're talking 7 acres of coverage for this battery.
Yeah,
Of this size. Okay, and associated with that 7 acre, but we're still talking, right? I mean.
Oh, yeah, we're still, the reason why we're bringing this to you now is, and we want to have approval to start negotiations. We'll come back to you for any final approval for any final contracts. Is that us being engaged with them being formed will allow them and us to apply for some grants near term.
Would the grants cover the tie-in costs? Would the grants be specific to the battery, or would the grants cover the cost of connecting?
It's meant to cover the whole project.
The whole project.
Yeah, we're estimating the whole project to be in the $30 to $40 million range, and our net invest would be in the $6 to $10 million range.
Just the
I hear you.
I'm just thinking the tie-in, the protections in the tie-in is going to be it to be that cost. You never mind the cost of the battery, so.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I think it's going to need some really good, upfront costs from the engineering side.
So before we engage with PLM and our engineering team is starting to do some work, but we're gonna engage in that initial design work as part of this negotiations with Form. It's a new animal.
Yeah, new animal. Yeah, and I just I like it, but it's just where it's per substation. But if you get the benefit of if Reading gets asked to reduce the load by X, if we're consuming 60 megawatts of power, however ISO goes, they say we want you to take 10. If this goes 10, does that mean, do they do it by substation or do they do it by?
So they'll do it
overall territory.
So they'll do it by tier. So in the wintertime right now, our average load is roughly in the peak hours in the wintertime is about 100 megawatts. And so what they'll start with is a 10% load reduction. If that's not enough, then they'll do a 15, then they'll do a 20.
Okay.
So 10 of 100 is going to be 10 megawatts. And this is meant to be part of the program. The other pieces that we have in the plan, not in the plan, but we're actually in the process of installing is another 20 megawatts of short-term 3 hours. So there's the projects, the Citizens project in Station 3. And then there's the Corsage project. These are all projects that we went through last year for approvals. That'll be on Fordham Road. So those two, and they're on different circuits, et cetera. So those are only 3 hours, right? And a typical load reduction is gonna last 2 to 4 hours, maybe 6. So again, what we're trying to do is create a scenario inside of our network where we can do load reduction. Because right now, the only way we can do load reduction, mandatory load reduction, is shutoffs. And so the idea, and you have to, obviously, you can't discharge a battery if it's not charged, right? So it's going to be a little bit more challenging, doable, because we'll have an idea that a mandatory load reduction, I won't say it's imminent, but is likely. So we will prepare for that time, because it doesn't suddenly, I mean, it can suddenly happen, but generally it's in a weather pattern.
Should not happen in the first world country. It should not.
Well,
Absolutely, but that,
you and I
that's
understand that.
embarrassing.
Yeah, but that's a whole other point. But part of the reason why it shouldn't is some of the things that we want to do to say, if ISO makes that request, then our goal is to basically discharge batteries. This would be part of it. Now this has 100 hours as opposed to 3, so it becomes much easier. But back to your point, there's no silver bullet, right? This is part of a bigger plan.
Shoot, yeah, okay.
And the other point, not for tonight's discussion, but it is very close to station 6. So that's part of the switching and the linking. That's going to be part of the solution in terms of how we distribute the energy. But anyways, distribute the power coming out of it. That's part of the plan too. But it's not going to be a full substation, but there will be switching gear in that location, which is just down the street from the 326 Ballard Vale. If you want to try and do the form, so literally these cars out there, I don't know where it is. So we had a representative from Form here at the CAB meeting. Pardon me? Yeah, you can go back to that one. If it's okay with you, we'll just have, it was a pretty interesting discussion. I'll let Bill just kind of walk through some of the highlights of who Form is, because we haven't had a chance to introduce them to you. I'm not, again, my apologies for him not being here right away. But the two gentlemen that were, Ken and Ray they were part of the discussion. So it was a pretty engaged discussion. But I'll let Bill try and choose some of the highlights of this in the context of, my apologies for Ted not being here right now.
Yeah.
Does that sound okay with you, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, this is an iron air battery. So it's basically, rusting and unrusting iron. So it's not any exotic materials. It is iron, mixed with air, with a, electrolyte in it. And that's what's making, allows it to generate electricity. So what there are many reasons why the iron is advantageous. One is iron is much more abundant than lithium. So there's plenty of this resource in the US. It can be domestically sourced. That means 100% of the battery is manufactured in the US, which makes it available to more tax credits, which we can receive in the form of a treasury payment. And it has a low cost. It's non-flammable. It scales very well because they can, like a lot of these technologies, you can continue to add modules onto it. And then the 100+ hour duration really allows you to be flexible in the amount of time that you can store energy. So this Form itself, their headquarters is in Somerville, Mass. They do have manufacturing in Pittsburgh and West Virginia, and they also do engineering out in the Bay Area of California. They got about 700 employees, and they've invited us to visit their lab in Somerville whenever we want, their headquarters there.
Road trip.
Yeah,
Good.
the short one.
This one, yeah.
So they're relatively young. They were formed in 2017, spun out of MIT, with a specific, they started with kind of a blue sky strategy where they looked at every option of what they could use for battery chemistries, and what they settled on was the iron air cell. And in the meantime, they've raised quite a bit of funding. You know, obviously the steel companies are interested in them because they're using their iron. And of course, there are a lot of utilities and governmental entities interested in it because this is considered an enabling technology for the clean energy transition. So they just broke ground last year on a 500 megawatt per year form factory. Yeah. Oh, and that's here, right? Yeah. So this is in West Virginia. You know, this is where they're transforming one of those energy communities. You know, they're close to steel production in West Virginia. And of course, it helps bring a state that might not be supportive of the energy transition, you know, against political support there because they do have a lot of jobs associated with
That picture on the right is February, as you can see from the.
the left is the concept and the right is the progress as of February. So they do have, we're not the first utility that would be implementing this. They do have a 1.5 megawatt battery in Minnesota with Great River Energy. They're working on 2 10 megawatt batteries with Excel Energy in Colorado and Minnesota. They're working on one in with the California Energy Commission, which is 5 megawatts. They have one with NYSERDA, Georgia Power, and Dominion, all of similar sizes. So, you know, obviously it meets a mission where you're looking for reliable, low cost, and zero carbon. It's almost like they've been looking at our slides. So they, you know, their focus is on that and ensuring reliability and low cost and facilitating the zero carbon. And in your package, there are some links in those slides to various other information. But yeah, sure.
Yeah, so, and just for those that the first, this is very similar, the same company. This presentation was not this presentation, but we as a group were introduced to form at the NEPA 2022 annual conference up in Stowe. So right after that, we met up with them, and this is kind of where we are in terms of the nature of the relationship. The idea of them doing something in Massachusetts, it's close. They have engineering resources, but the company headquarters in Somerville, they're trying to find something local to test. They think it's good PR for them. They think access to dollars, so they're motivated to do something with a local company like us. So go ahead.
So lead time, if, you know, from the word go, when would a system actually be in place?
So we haven't gotten to the delivery times yet, and since the factory isn't complete yet.
Oh, so it would be coming
from the West Virginia factory.
But
we're thinking,
sorry, what was the timeline on the factory?
End of this year.
End of this year.
So you get they're under construction now, but production is supposed to be in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. So we think, you know, 2027 would not be enough. Reasonable.
And then the materials and what's the useful life of this system?
So they say it's 1,300 cycles, full cycles, like that's what they're planning for. But since they don't have long-term, you know, they've only been around since 2017. I don't think they tested that, but I think they're being conservative in estimating it'll be 1,300 cycles. So that's what would be in the guarantee.
The longer it lasts, but it's all based on the
Yeah,
Those are
the amount of
full
time
cycles,
to fully, fill it and discharge it.
So, I mean, what is our modeling?
15-20 year project plan.
15 or 20 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And from a maintenance standpoint, is there anything?
There's some, so it does consume water. So because the air is flowing over the electrolyte, you do have to refill water into it. And that's why one of the things about pairing it in a clean energy hub with a fuel cell is that the carbon capture portion will generate water. That's one of the outputs.
Yeah.
So we can treat it and use that to refill the battery. And it all depends on the relative humidity in the air. If it's more humid, less water evaporates from the fuel cell. from from the battery. If it's drier, then you get more evaporation.
Water is the consumer. That's the major. And so depending on where you are, that could be a big expense for us.
Yeah, that schematic didn't really provide a lot of details in terms of the inputs and outputs. And I did ask where the oxygen is coming from, and it is air. And the one contaminant in the air they're concerned about is particulate matter. So you don't want particulate to get into that membrane or that electrolyte and be a contaminant. So they would filter the air. So there's maintenance around filtration, maintenance, water supply to keep the electrolyte at its proper hydration, being the two main things. They didn't seem to think any other air contaminant was going to be particularly bothersome. NOx, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, those would be other air contaminants would be common depending on where it is. Not a, you're probably not too far away from 93 highway at the site. So, car exhaust would not be trivial at that point. But
a filtration system could.
But a particular filtration would be certainly a basic element of it. So filter maintenance, a HEPA filter, some sort of membrane filter would certainly be appropriate for treating the gas stream and maintaining that, and then water. Other than that, I don't see much downside in terms of reactants.
The other issue is there's 7 acres of this. Like each building, what's each building like? I don't know. Well, that's again way into the weeds. Who's doing all this maintenance? Is it them or us? I'm assuming it would be.
Yeah.
It would be. Oh, I would assume it would be us because there's no way that they could maintain all these facilities on as they grow, right?
Yeah.
And so that's part of the business model discussion that we haven't finalized yet. But given the point, one of the reasons why we want to do something with them, or they want to do something with us, is we are so close. So that we're gonna, we're gonna be part of their test bed, and what's working, what's not working, and then back to your building concept. These are, I think you said 140,000. So they're basically, their size basically is tractor trailer. The trailer portion of them.
Yeah.
It's meant to be modular, as they need to swap things in and out. If something doesn't go right, they can swap them in and out. That's part of the design. They are kind of heavy because it's iron.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's also, and so anyways, it's gonna require land, and that's part of the reason why, there's a whole bunch of pieces that are coming together. The momentum's in the right direction, but part of the reason why we wanted to put it where we up in that area goes back to the load. That's more industrial commercial. That's the larger area of load. It is, it's easy on, easy off relative to 93 and Route 125. It's in a, we're not going through a residential area to do this kind of stuff. So those are all the benefits of, and then it would be theoretically close to a source of water, which is another element. And that land, we have some environmental work to do on it, but it'll handle the weight. That's part of the question in terms of our evaluation, but it's not our landfill project. We couldn't put it there. So those are different factors in terms of how we're thinking about the location.
If you're thinking of water coming from the fuel cell, I don't see much of a problem with that, except that you would have a very low pH coming out of the fuel cell.
Right.
So if you want to bring it up to neutral or something, and minimize any mineral that you would have in it through that process, you would have to manage that. But other than that,
Yeah, in fact, based on the discussion we had last Thursday night, there's been email traffic going back and forth between the two in terms of what requirements do you have for chemistries and what's coming out. So that's
you wouldn't want to put a lot of calcium in a stream that's going into a battery, but you could do hydroxide or something, which would be very simple chemistry.
There's enough water coming out of the one to support.
So far, based on the initial analysis, yeah.
So what is maybe you mentioned the financing of this. How is this being financed? I think you mentioned, I didn't catch it.
So the big picture is that a combination of their funds via discounts, state grants, federal grants, and the state grants is the one that we're trying to move quickly on because there's a window of opportunity for us to do applications, and they need to be partnered with somebody. And then our net cost would probably be somewhere in the range of 6 to 10 million, 6 to 9 million, somewhere in that range. That would be our cost.
Is this add to plant?
Yes, add to plant.
Other
Yes, it is.
So in other words, the 2% could go more. To each
Yes, sir.
towns
That's exactly right.
In this case, the above the line payment.
That's correct too.
Yes,
It's a win for everybody.
so there's a benefit to the 4 towns in the district.
And
Wait, you want to, Phil, why don't you just for the rest of the,
Okay, so under the 20-year agreement, we had to go to the state to get legislation on this. Basically, there's what we call the above the line payment, which is basically 2% of the net plan, and it's divided among the 4 towns
like,
based
kilowatt hour?
upon kilowatt usage in each town on that. So if we add more to the plan, we basically increase those payments that are going to the 4 towns. At this point, there's that advantage. We also increase the bottom line too, the below the line payment, but then that, we got to take that from the rates, which is, which is always a consideration at this point. So that would basically be more money that would go to the towns every time we add something to the plan. As
Sounds
one of the
good.
managers said, someday we'll buy a gold plated truck.
For talking about that. Probably not.
Just the buyer. And then I'm sure we're gonna look at this as we get closer, if we move to approval of the investment, but ballpark savings on an annual basis from avoiding peak plant usage.
Yeah, that'll, so the modeling is, 5 to 10 years, that's $6 to $10 million will be covered.
5 to 10 year.
Yeah, that's
Payback.
payback, yeah.
Okay.
To cover it. The final modeling, this one isn't as model as advanced as the carbon capture fuel cell one. We've been working on that one in more detail.
Okay.
More specific, but yeah, that'll actually be part of, and obviously, what has to be part of that is, in this particular case, we're going to talk about adding on in a few minutes a line item to our budget so that we can potentially go through the process of doing a bid on this one. This one probably is not, we're working with council on this one, but because this is such a unique one, this might not be a bid process, unlike the carbon capture fuel cell, even though it's unique. Anyways, we're walking through the process, but we want to make sure that we get provide flexibility for us to do that if that becomes an option. So in either case, we're not asking for permission to contract with either one of these players, but to move the process forward.
And are these 2 projects independent, the fuel cell and the?
They are independent. They haven't been co-located. There's synergistic value of putting them together, but we're looking at the 2 separate projects. It just happen to be co-located, and to the extent we're trying to, optimize everything that comes out of that carbon capture fuel cell system, if we can find a good use for it, we're gonna try and do that. The water, right? Obviously, the whole idea behind all this is to provide electricity. So, right. But everything else, what can we do with it? How can we turn it to a net positive, not just throw it away. Throw water.
So, with in-house engineering, right? It's always a challenge just to get them to do anything because they're already taxed. But to get an estimate to create this, to tie this in, it's a big, to me, that's a big deal, right? And
yeah,
I just, do you want to outsource that? I mean, that's something but that's a significant expense, engineering can be 15-20% of the cost of any job. So
we do it so I think we do it, to answer your question, Bob, we do it in 2 phases. So the engineering team is already looking at how this might be in that location, what the circuits and how it might look. So that's step 1. We would probably engage the PLM's doing our design work, like literally right now on our substation.
Yeah.
So we would add the potential of the circuit design. I mean, they're literally working on it as we speak.
Yes.
Which is why we want to get this fun. If we're going to do something with this, and we think we should, that'll be part of the design they do there. So PLM will probably do, well, not probably, our intention is to have them do the more detailed design work. We're going to run our business modeling and what do we actually do with form specifically in parallel. As we get further down the road, we'll probably have a little more detailed engineering from the PLM guys. But before we do a formal project, we're going to come back to you with a formal proposal. We'll have an idea, so we have to have some estimates. So what I'm saying is the PLM guys are going to say, the cost of that, the incremental cost to add this system to the substation is going to be X $1 million. Not going to be 100,000. It's going to be
should be.
Yeah,
it's millions, and that
millions.
And whatever we tie in for some type of storage or peak management system, it would be good now to bring that in to say, or do you have to say, they might tell you I can only target 2 circuits. I can't do all 7. Right? It's impossible.
And whether it's 2, 5, So
Two-
that
two-
goes to the other element in terms of, you know intimately well, and for the rest of them to know, we have different circuits, and so part of the circuit design is to not have any individual circuit to be try and balance all the circuits out. But the second element, if a circuit does go out, the ability to move that load to another circuit. So there's a redundancy that's built into it, and it's not just a one-for-one redundancy. We've got I won't say a complicated network, but it's a sizable net for an MLP. It's a sizable network. The fact that it's 13.8 provides some flexibility, and it might actually, this might be the mechanism. Again, if the Linfield piece comes together and the Maple Meadow piece comes together, in talking with PLM, this might be the right time to actually conceptualize the 34.5 kV ring that ties the main generation, and then have the circuits pull off of that. So there's a bigger design piece that goes into this, but it goes back to the fundamental issue, to support load, and load's coming. And right, the conductors can handle a significant amount of additional current going through them. But the transformers and the switching gear, you're exactly right, they can't. So that's all part of this, we need to be, doing stuff now for the load that's coming 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, I think that getting back to that study, if you're gonna introduce it and you want to put it in a new substation, that's perfect time.
Yeah.
Let's tie it in, let's build the infrastructure that it will be able to interact, right? So you're gonna have to, if it's substations here and this place is not here, down the street, another conduit bank going down, tie it all in together. It's not gonna go in overhead pole lines because it's not gonna be able to do that. So, do you tie them, one source of energy going back in, it distributes out. So it's a significant add to that substation design. So
there's the design itself, and then the cost of it and the trade-offs, but I think you're prompting us and encouraging us to look at this now.
I would, I like the idea of peak shape. I think it's a good idea, and I think it's economical. I think it's coming, but it's just a very good time when you have a substation design to give that to them, incorporate it in, and they might say, well, we could do X.
Right.
And it might scale this back to 5. It might turn around. They say, great, you can do 10, but I can't do 10 there's no.
Yeah. No,
reason
good
for
point.
that.
Good point.
Yeah. So it might scale it up. It could scale it up. I don't know.
Yeah. No, but that's part of the, again, we haven't done as detailed design work on this one. And just so you guys all know, there's the business model design and the economics, but this is what we're talking about now. We're talking about the technical design. There's details in terms of how you plug, anyways, there's a technical element of
I
it.
just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying make sure that we're not oversizing for what the different
Yes.
connectors can actually.
And distance, the farther you go, the more it costs. So, for example, I'm just gonna throw a number out, 1,500 feet could cost $1.5 million in conduit. That's not cable, that's not anything, right?
Got it.
That's 1,500 feet. Now, if you're that close, you're fortunate. If you're a mile, okay, you're talking $6 million just for conduit, right? Not for cable, not for equipment, all that other, scale and scope, right? So it could cost you $8 million to tie in 10 megawatts. That's not economical, right? And I don't care how we shake it, make it, that's not economical. It's just too much money to invest for that shaving, that amount of shaving for that period. But that's what you need to know, right? The location is key. How are you going to tie it in, right? What it's going to take to tie it in, and unless it's cohabitated, or the closer you can get, the better off you are. And again, Greg's got a couple other generations going at other places, which is good. And each substation almost needs its own. The conceptual ring, great idea, but that's 10 years out, right?
Oh, agreed.
Yeah, that's
No, and
way out. But I
You know how we
have
build
to-
things, right? You got to think, right? I mean, just so you guys all know, we have to think what's it going to look like 10 or 15 years down the road, because we can't do this. You can't build it all in one fell swoop. You got to do it in phases.
I just think that, this is a good, peak shaving is a good idea. It's just that it's location and what we can do. So continue talking, but on the flip side, we've got to figure out if you have a target, put together numbers to get from point A to point B, talk to your substation design engineers, have them build capacity for a tie-in.
Yep.
Right now, I think that would be very good on our part, being forward thinking
Yep.
at Reading Lake.
Just to clarify one thing, when you say peak shaving, you mean getting a battery that delivers some peak. That's what you mean by, that's what you're saying.
That's right, the battery
Discharge,
discharging, not customers
Right.
turning off lights
Turning
at
off the,
peak hours.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
it underscores broken record over here, but the real peak shaving is getting that demand suppressed during peaks, as opposed to keeping on feeding it with more and more generation or battery storage.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. Part of the 2024 goals. And thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, Pan made the point that we had the capacity of turning on a generator. Well, that's burning hydrocarbons and that's consuming fuel. So if we discharge a battery, that saves
I get
peak
that.
shaving it by.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm just,
I'm just, because peak shaving really means suppressing demand.
Right.
But, but supplying the peak is what a generation or a battery does.
Yeah, but
It's supplying the peak.
supply the peak demand.
The, the offset is, do I have something that can be a gas generator that could cost $3 million versus $12 million? The economic benefit of that, even though I hope we never ever get into shutting off lights for anybody ever.
Right.
But at some point, yeah, I could peak shave it, but our rates will be to pay for that peak shaver. We've got to consider that, right? That's the balance.
And I would agree that, I mean, building a small, cheap gas peak generator and having all that extra money available to just encourage the demand side reduction is a conceptual approach as well.
Okay.
All of the, I mean, it's all the.
No, I hear you.
But if it's tens upon tens of millions to build banks of batteries before we've really wrung all the waste out of the system that's all.
Yeah, and so you understand, I mean, we've talked about, so it's a common theme in terms of keep the lights on, manage the cost, be compliant, right? And I think what collectively we're all saying is there's no one silver bullet to make it all happen. It's a combination of a whole bunch of pieces. And as you, and again, I think Dave, you're reminding us, yep, load reduction in terms of lights off or systems off or whatever, so that load is not present during the peak is something you're saying, don't forget that
And
piece.
it's free. If you can make it happen, it's free.
Yeah. Well, not totally, yeah, it's
Not
inexpensive,
free, but
it's inexpensive, but yeah, relatively speaking. Yeah, agreed. So. All right, oh, back to your motion. So we'd like to continue getting more, again, we're gonna come back to you with something more detailed relative to form, but we would like your approval to more fully, enter into negotiations and more detailed discussions with Form Entity.
Want to read the motion, Ray?
Move that RMLD Board of Commissioners, on the recommendation of the Citizens Advisory Board, vote to accept the general manager's recommendation to enter negotiations with Form Energy for a long-duration energy storage system with final contract approval under separate and subsequent motion.
Is that moves, is that second?
Second.
Second, Dave seconds it. Further discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. We're on to 9. Another guest.
Well, maybe they, because they were here last week, they might have thought it was on Thursday, so our apologies, although I see Sam's car out there. So anyways, we're gonna continue going forward.
That's right.
We're not gonna wait. So with your permission, Phil,
Go ahead,
this is an option study. Great.
Right, keep going.
So I want to report out on the technology assessment report done by Veolia North America. So at the request of this board, last fall, we undertook a study of in-territory generation options. We did issue an RFP in December for the report. Veolia North America, their Sustainable Industries of Buildings division was selected. Veolia and RMLD created a list of potential technologies to meet. Basically, the criteria was meet long-term energy supply needs, keeping with our mission of reliable, low cost, and increasingly non-carbon electricity delivery. We did brainstorm the screening criteria. So the screening criteria that we put into their model was the capacity requirements, the capital costs, non-fuel operating, OpEx costs, carbon emissions, fuel costs, incentives available, the time frame that these technologies would be available, the technical attributes, as well as the land area requirements, which for in-territory generation is very important. So this is, and we do have a full report that was distributed, but this just gives you the highlights. So just to lay out this table, along the top are the units. So and the technology. So we have wind, solar, carbon capture fuel cell, geothermal, and then looking at hydrogen engines, both in a high cost fuel scenario and a low cost fuel scenario. So when we looked at the capacity, that's basically, we said, how many megawatts do you need to install capacity in order to generate 100,000 megawatt hours of energy? So as you can see, this with the next line down, the capacity factor, are kind of inversely related. So the wind, has a 26% capacity factor, meaning that in order to get 100,000 megawatt hours of energy, you need to, yes.
And I will invoke my privilege as meteorologist. There is no wind resource within the district. There's one hill which you might be able to capture wind resource. So the numbers for wind, I think, serve a useful comparison
Yeah.
for the value of other things, but as far as an option in the district, it's really not an option.
Okay. And then on solar, it has a very low capacity factor. So in order to get 100,000 megawatt hours, you need to install 69 megawatts of capacity, because it does have a 17% capacity factor. When you look at the carbon capture fuel cell, the fuel cell is base loaded, has a pretty high capacity factor, 95%. So in order to get 100,000 megawatt hours, you only need to install 12 megawatts of capacity. So that plays into the footprint as well. Geothermal, that has a fairly high capacity factor. So again, need very little capacity to generate 100,000 megawatt hours. And then the hydrogen engines have the same profile. The only difference in these options is the fuel costs, but they have a high. If you can get the hydrogen, they have a high capacity factor, and a relatively low capacity profile. So the levelized cost of electricity, that's basically based on the operating costs and the paying down the capital, amortizing the capital. So we calculated that as a base, and then we also added the land costs. So the larger the footprint of these options, the higher, particularly if they're in territory, the higher the cost of the option. And as you can see, the land costs for some of them are huge. So the solar and wind, even though they look relatively cheap, when you do not consider the land costs associated with them, once you add in the land costs, they really are quite expensive. And for the fuel cell, even though it is the operating cost is higher, because it does have a fuel cost associated with it. The land cost is very low because it does have a very small footprint. So the basis we used was $500,000 an acre, which for this, this real estate market is about what we're seeing for other parcels.
Undeveloped.
The geothermal also has a relatively low land cost if you don't count land that you need to drill down into vertically, which you don't, I guess, if you get drilling rights. And then the hydrogen engine, you can see here the real difference between the fuel costs. So the low fuel cost is about half of that of the high fuel cost case. And of course, the land costs, these are very small footprint. So that it doesn't have a high land cost. But again, it's still just the fuel cost puts it out of the running as far as the total levelized cost of electricity. And then the time frame, varies for some of them. So, it would take 3 to 4 years to develop a wind project. Solar projects are very quick. The carbon capture fuel cell would be just a little longer than the solar. Geothermal is a longer term because it is a very low temperature geothermal resource that we're sitting on top of. We need the technology to advance a bit more before it's ready. And then the hydrogen, in the near term, it's going to be, a very high fuel cost. And then the outlook is that it may be in 8 years and beyond the cost of that drop of accessing hydrogen drops. But this is sort of the result. We wanted to give an overview of it. If you look in the report, there are a lot of details on each of the options and the assumptions that went into them. But happy to answer any questions that you have on.
So what is the conclusion I'm supposed to draw from this?
The conclusion is, well, if we're looking at the lowest cost options, the carbon capture fuel cell is the lowest cost and it has the highest availability. It is available in a relatively short time frame. And then the next, but that doesn't mean we do the carbon capture fuel cell at the expense of everything else. We can still do solar. It's just, we need to be selective about where we put it because land costs are expensive.
Yeah.
And if you take out the land costs and we can put it on rooftops, it becomes less costly.
And I think, so the other takeaway is carbon capture is economically viable. The second takeaway on solar, if we have to buy new land to do, so we're looking at putting a significant piece on Maple Meadows. That land cost is going to be less. So we're in the sub $100 range on that. We've modeled that very detailed. I think the other key takeaway is geothermal right now, because the technology is still early. It has a lot of interest relative to its small footprint, but it is currently expensive. And it's still way out there. So ultimately, we think in terms of what we can see, carbon capture is a good intermediate bridge technology. We'll do as much solar as we can. We think geothermal has got legs and potential. We're not the development companies that are doing it, but in terms of what's available for our territory, if we can do something down, that looks like a viable solution, and we're going to continue to look for other alternatives. So that, those 3 middle columns, I think, Phil, are the key takeaways. Carbon capture makes sense as a bridge. I mean, all these have trade-offs. There's no, like we said, there's no silver bullet.
Right.
Yeah, just to follow up what you're saying, not disagreeing with what you're saying, I agree.
Yeah.
When we choose the word term geothermal, yes, we're drawing heat from the ground, but this is heat to generate power.
Exactly.
Not heat to transfer heat to buildings, because we're
Critical
talking
point.
about geothermal a lot in terms of Killam School using geothermal power.
Different.
And that's a heat pump system where we're just transferring heat from relatively shallow wells, which could go down 1,000 feet. But we're talking much
Or
more
miles.
than that because you want to get to very much harder environment and transfer and make steam and drive a turbine.
Yeah.
So geothermal power system as opposed to heat transfer. So I want to make that point in terms of people looking at this.
Very good.
Second, what that means when we talk about solar and the advantage is not putting it on fresh land, but getting on top of buildings, on top of Killam, on top of Eaton, on top of the ice rink, on top of any building that we can possibly put a building on, making sure that all those structures are capable of having solar, using solar. I think we need to make a greater penetration into our residential solar array, look at our options there and make sure that we're incentivizing people to do that. Because it is the land cost. Yes, Bill, you brought up a point earlier that levelized cost of electricity might go up a little bit as we move to a smaller unit sizes. But if $100 goes to $40, then that's a lot of money we can move toward incentivizing the solar site. So I think this has more penetration on buildings, on residences for solar, and as a complement to what we're doing with
Yeah.
the fuel cell.
Yeah, and I think your qualification on geothermal is exactly right. We're talking about generating electricity, very different than heating buildings.
Which
Biggest
is a
risk.
good thing to do, but
Yeah.
but yes, it's just using the one term. It's just an adjective. It's not the verb.
We're gonna,
Move on.
okay, good.
Okay.
This is, we're gonna have guests, but it's the Bill show tonight, so he's gonna do a quick summary. And several of you are actually able to join us for the Carbon Quest visit. And then we'll do the capital and then the executive. Thank you, Bill.
Oh, sure.
I think I'm doing. Okay, so this is a report out of a due diligence trip that members of the Board of Commissioners and the Citizens Advisory Board made on March 7th to look at the carbon capture, one of the carbon capture options for the carbon capture fuel cell. The system we visited was at 1930 Broadway. It's a 232 unit, 30-story apartment building built in 2002. There are two 400 horsepower boilers in the basement. They are currently diverting flue gas to the Carbon Quest system since 2021. So the process basically is dewater, compress, the zeolite absorbs CO2, and then it's subject to a vacuum, and the CO2 is released from the zeolite. It is not cryogenically stored; it's low temperature refrigeration.
Oh, I didn't say
as Ken,
Correct.
and it's trucked away. And there are this system is about 5 tons a day of CO2 removal from the boilers. The system we're looking at will be, if it's on the 20 megawatt fuel cell, it would be 150 tons per day. So there is a scale up.
But what relative size? Is that a tanker truck a day? 2? What?
Oh, no.
I think they said every 3 days.
Every 3 days there'd be a
Every 3 days?
yeah.
At this location,
At this location.
were you asking at this location?
No, I'm talking about
Our location
what we
would be
made.
one a day.
Yeah.
one a day.
Somewhere between one a day and one a week, but let's plan on worst case one a day. Depends on how much storage you have on site.
So for the RMLD project, we're looking at removing 92% of the CO2 from the fuel cell at the exhaust flange. And the fuel cell will provide 20 megawatts of base load capacity. That is compliant with the 2021 climate law. The modular design would integrate with the fuel cell. So the fuel cells are modular, and then the carbon capture, if we utilize this process, it would also be modular. So you could match up groups of fuel cells with groups of the Carbon Quest process. That simplifies the scale up, and it also reduces the construction risk because everything is modularized and on skids, so it's easy to install. So under the current business model, Carbon Quest markets the CO2 captured. They're in the site that we visited. They are sending it to a brick manufacturer in Brooklyn, where it is put into concrete bricks, and the wall of the building we were in was made from those bricks, reportedly. And they're also exploring selling the CO2 to polymer and chemical manufacturers, as well as liquid fuels. Under the model they've discussed, they would be purchasing the CO2 from us, from the fuel cell. So we would not have to be involved in the marketing of the CO2 to end users. They would be giving us a guaranteed price for for the CO2. The path forward here is we are reviewing other carbon capture options. We were all impressed with the way that this was functioning. So it was, you know, the boiler was operating the day we were there, and we could see the unit working. It's relatively simple in process and relatively easy to understand. But we want to continue due diligence on their process. So we'll look at the risk mitigation plan, and that's, you know, the main risk elements are, you know, the scale up risk. There is a supply chain risk, particularly on some of the you know, the zeolite. We want to make sure there's a steady supply of that. We want to evaluate counterparty risk. Carbon Quest is a startup. The principals have had several successful startups, but they still are a startup. So we want to make sure we have counterparty risk mitigation. And then of course there's performance risk, the longevity and reliability of the system risk, and then regulatory risk. We want to be sure that we have that covered, and we're diving into all of it currently. And then so the next step would be to develop an LOI with Carbon Quest, where we would, you know, do a more detailed design, and we'd make any movement forward contingent on threshold economics, performance, and regulatory hurdles, and all of the items that are in our risk mitigation list. So with that, any questions on?
You're probably going to get the idea. I get a lot of questions. You guys a lot of questions. Maybe my enthusiasm will temper down with duration, and I'll be as mellow as Phil is after 30 years. But right now, I'm still in my first meeting, so a lot of enthusiasm. While they do have a number of sites that they're operating, they're still operating on boiler exhaust. There's not much experience yet on fuel cells. And while they did indicate that they were working with a fuel cell, natural gas-fired fuel cell manufacturer, there are a number of things we're going to want to see that success before we understand it. One issue is they were talking about recycled gas going back to the fuel cell, that there might be hydrogen slip. Well, there's also could be methanol slip. Methanol is also a byproduct of the that can come through the processing of natural gas into the fuel cell, and then how much moisture cycles back, and a number of other things. So what are we getting? What's going back to the fuel cell? Is that affecting fuel cell performance with that recycle stream? Or what are we losing by on the light side of that extraction? The gas mix for a boiler is a lot of nitrogen, a fair amount of oxygen, and then you get to carbon dioxide and water. We're going to have nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water, and pretty much that's it. And so when they're probably at 92% because a good chunk's going to go into the water, the condensate, leaving us with a low pH condensate. So, which is fine, but how they managing that, how they treating that, we're going to want to know that too. So, you know, as we look at this technology, I just don't want to be the first one applying this to a fuel cell. I want to be the second person applying to a fuel cell.
Yeah,
where these bugs get worked out, because it's not the same. Now, I think separating water from carbon dioxide should be relatively easy. There are differences in molecular weight. They're both polar, but they could very well separate quite easily, as long as you're not getting into a liquid phase in the through the media. But I'd like them to experience that before we try it. Regulatory, we do need to probably keep an eye on our own senators. There's some pressure to not look at carbon recovery as a viable green energy solution. So let's try to keep them calm and mellow while we are in transition here and look at that. Methane will still be coming, it'll still leak through pipes in the ground, and so it's not completely green, but it's it's a necessary step, I think,
Yeah, you want
to
say
get
something?
there.
Just to follow up your point on the wanting to be the second, they were talking a bit at the visit about the systems behind the Walmarts, the Targets, or the whatever the stores were.
Yes,
That I think
those are fuel cells.
those are fuel cell with carbon capture or
No,
just fuel cell?
Just fuel
Okay.
cell.
So is there something in the pipeline that is these two together that would be ahead of power?
So two thoughts. So fuel cell, so in terms of the fuel cell themselves, that technology is well established. What's different about this is bolting carbon capture onto a fuel cell.
Right.
So on that comment, we agree, we don't want to be the very first commercial installation. So Bloom is already there. If we're in parallel with them, evaluating a couple different groups. They will they'll have a work. So it's part of our requirement, and they're already on a path. They're going to do a commercial. We won't be the very first commercial system. We'll be the third, fourth, probably not the second. We'll be somewhere in that range. But advice well taken for all of us, because at the end of the day, our charge collectively, all of us, our charge is, minimize risk, right? I mean, the charge is keep the lights on, but there's a whole bunch of things that go into that, and risk management is a key piece of it. Relative to there's a regulatory and legislative group, and so realizing that our metric, our compliance metric, is retirement of non-carbon certificates. That's our metric. Our metric to meet at 2030, 2040, and 2050 is not carbon. There is a push, and there is a momentum to reduce natural gas projects in the Commonwealth. So that's part of the reason why we basically position this as a bridge technology. Net CO2 output is dramatically less. So some of the modeling on the earlier analysis we've shown in the earlier slides is our net CO2 output in tons per year or tons per hour would be 40% less than the current path we're on right now. Pretty significant. We have met at the recommendation. We've met with a couple of the regulatory teams, in particular the one group that would be responsible for qualifying this system as for clean energy certificates. And the qualification is to be less than 50% of a combined cycle natural gas system. This is roughly 92% less. But they're still so we're still working with that group. We met with them a week ago Monday. They're lukewarm. We would probably be generous on the concept. We have also met with now 9 senators and representatives, particularly those in the local area. We've done a presentation to them on this project. So we're keeping them up to speed. They're all been, they're encouraged with us trying to figure out an innovative bridge technology. And it's not just us, right? But we're part of the catalyst. So I think we're doing a very good job on the legislative side, and we're starting the regulatory side. And so good advice on that. I think we're ahead of the curve. And we're with you in terms of, we don't want to be, leading edge is okay, but not bleeding edge. We've got more work to do on this project. It's novel. And then, related to the comments that we talked about on the Form battery system, this is a 20 megawatt system. Net output will be roughly 18 megawatts. So back to Phil's comment, it's nice to generate it, but you got to get it into your network. And this is intended to be a base load system. So that's part of the design as well. That's why this is a $100 million plus project. And that goes back to, so it's a whole bunch of, it's a lot of factors here, but this particular one, so anyways, that's the key point. So yes, on the.
Yeah, I mean, I like the technology. I don't want to just put it down.
Oh, no, you're not. Nobody is.
I mean, that.
Yeah.
Reduce the volume of gas you're treating through condensate, getting the condensate out. Pressure swing is established for a lot of gas separation technology. It's not a new technology. The media they use might be innovative, but the concept is not. So really, your compressor is there just to overcome the head loss across the sand, across the media. So, really, it's very basic, very simple.
Yeah.
And so it's nothing extraordinarily complex.
That process risk, but the whole package.
But as you put the two pieces together and you look at the efficiencies between the two, there's some losses, there's some gains, there's some consequences, and you just need to understand what they are and have somebody figure it out before it comes to us.
If the environment legislative environment is looking at this like they were looking at biomass.
Yeah,
Right,
we're,
which
we're,
is-
yeah,
Yeah,
go
then
ahead. We,
I would
Ron,
run,
yeah.
you know, and do we want to do that? You know,
Yeah.
that was that passed us three.
Yeah.
Right, like Dot, we had a great source of non-carbon energy.
The common project.
Yep, went raging forward. Entered into a contract, had to put on the brakes and basically had to live with it for 3 years of hesitation and trepidation to break free. If the legislative environment here will not include that, then I think basically just run with it's a fuel cell. You know, at that, again, I hate to say the word cost, but at $100 million for 20 megawatts, that's a huge
expensive.
investment.
So it ends up, so 2 points. One is, part of the reason why we brought this, you know, we brought this to the November meeting. And it was purposely to raise, you know, make it visible. And then we started we started in December talking to the regulatory and legislative for that exact reason, before we got too far down the road. And if we're pushing on a string, then we're gonna find another ball to pick up and work on. So, we are highly sensitive to that because we don't want to waste time and money. I mean, we're not, you know, right now it's time.
Yeah.
But before we get too far down the road, so we are purposely being, as opposed to having this, you know, kind of all baked and ready and to go by the time we bring it to you guys. You guys are part of, we're sharing this with you partially to make it visible outside. And that's why we're doing, you know, as I shared with a couple of you guys, we're doing these legislative and regulatory meetings. Because if we're pushing on a string, then we're gonna push on something else. So well advised, and that's how we're approaching it. So that's why we're not, you know, this isn't, you know, we're gonna talk in a minute about increasing the budget to allow us to move forward, because in order to keep going down the road, we're trying to keep our options open, but we're not presenting for either one of these projects, you know, approval to contract. We're gonna do that when we have a little more details. But I think publicly for all of, I think everybody in the discussion today is cautious, but trying to figure out a solution. But, you know, anyways, you got the idea. So I think that's so. Any other questions on the results? Okay. I want to, if we could, Phil, keep the ball moving forward. We can go to the budget and then the general manager and then get to the side. All right. Okay. Okay. So you got 2. Okay. So big picture. So we've got several new capital projects that are starting to materialize, and this is one. You know, the carbon capture and the fuel cell are one of them. These are 3 kind of blocks. The message here is, these are projects. Several of these projects are going to require us to go out for some sort of bid process. And so we're working with our purchasing team and council, and learning from some of the lessons that the other MLPs have done in similar projects. For example, we are part of the Watson project. That was a 2009-2010 project. It was another $110 million project. So how did they do it? So trying to learn, which is why we're going to ask to increase the budget. The budget line item in the motion is $140 million. I want to put that $140 million in the context of our capital budget that we approved back in October, $34 million. So this is a massive amount of money, right? It is bigger than our revenue forecast for the year. We want to put that as a line item, because in order for us to do any sort of bid process, if it's not in the budget, we can't do a bid process. So that's why we're asking to put it in the budget. But to give you a little bit of context here, so these are kind of a couple different groups. The top one is basically the energy, the energy park that Bill and I were talking about. This is the Route 125 area. So carbon capture, fuel cell on the left-hand side, project name, the battery, the fuel cell, and the land. You know, the gross, we have 2 lines. So the quick description, there's the gross CapEx, and then there's the net RMLD CapEx. And part of these would be net of funds and discounts, et cetera. And then an idea, and then that next column over, is it in the 2024 budget or not? There's only 2 items on here that are in the budget: the Route 125 land, and then the Maple Meadow land. So those are both in the budget. And then just to give us, you know, all of us, but you guys also, an idea what the annual CapEx CapEx outflow would look like over the next 4 years. So these, when we talk about $140 million, we're not gonna spend it all in one fell swoop. These are multi-year projects, if we were to do them, but just to give you an order of magnitude. So there's the carbon capture fuel cell, long duration battery. There's gross CapEx numbers there. We think net, the carbon capture fuel cell will be somewhere in the $80 million range. The long duration battery is somewhere between 6 to 9 million, but 9. The energy park, that 8 megawatt solar array, that's going to be at least another year down the road until we clear title, but that's a $30 million one. So, we'll start 2025, commission 2027. That Linfield water, that's the project. That's going to be a 25, 26 event. None of these are approved, right? Just so we're trying to basically set the stage. And then, several of you guys have mentioned last week and this week, rooftop town type stuff, so town PV in North Reading, town PV and PV for photovoltaic in Reading, North Reading and Wilmington. So there are specific projects that we're working on right now. We have estimated dollars. We've had EPC, potential developers look at these. So that $5, $1, and $2 million numbers are real. Those are real ballpark numbers in terms of people actually looked at the sites, not us kind of shoot from the hip. So potentially, if we were to do all of these projects, the net CapEx to us would be in the range of $140 million. And then you get an idea over the next, we'd spend that over the next 4 years, 20, 40, 54. So big numbers. We would fund these primarily out of, so the net RMLD CapEx would be a combination, some ratepayer dollars. Well, it's ultimately all ratepayer dollars, but it would be bonded. And so we are working right now with the town. We had a meeting earlier this week, and we've got some follow-up stuff in terms of how we do the process. So there's funding stuff that needs to be worked out as well. But all of these projects, and we talked specifically about the carbon capture fuel cell project, but if we were to bond it, and we were to do an $80 million note, and we did it 4%, and we did it over a 15-year period, which is the period, it still, with all the cost into it, the financial model is it's less expensive than buying on the wholesale market right now. So at the end of the day, it's a net savings, even though I'm spending $100 million. There's more work to be done on that, or $80 million net. So we're looking at these a little more carefully, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of context in terms of the big picture. And then I'm going to go back a slide. So this is the carbon capture one, a little more detailed. We haven't finalized the model, but there's a scenario. So back to Phil's point that he mentioned earlier, there is a motivation for us to actually own assets where there's not a lot of technical risk. A fuel cell doesn't have a lot of technical risk by itself. However, we're not quite, the current thinking right now is we would most likely do the carbon capture system under a services agreement. We're not owning the asset. We're not taking the technical risk of the asset. You still pay money for it, but you're moving the risk to somebody else. We put a contingency into the budget, et cetera, but net, it would be probably an $80 million project. As I mentioned before, cash flow, realistically, it's going to be in the second year, but no later than the third year. And we'll share, when we get to approve the project, we'll share the stuff in more detail. But just to give you a big order of magnitude, a carbon, $80 million, 20 megawatt carbon capture fuel cell is positive right out of the gate, with a bunch of assumptions. So anyways, I'm giving you a bunch of big pictures, but what we're asking for you to do right now is not to spend the money, but to add $140 million to our capital budget for 2024, right? This is what we approved back in October to allow us to prepare to go out for a bid if that proves to be the right scenario. With me so far? Questions? Yeah.
So 2 of the items that are included in this 140 on that page.
Yep.
Are already in the budget.
That's correct.
So do you need the full 140 or could we do one?
All right, well, if I were to, so, I could do 130. The reason I'm sticking with 140 is we were looking at 140 to do the full carbon capture. We said we're probably not going to do this. So we did a writing in the meeting with the CAB. So it'll be appropriate, unless we don't go back to the CAB to change the number. It'd be just simple to, whether it's 130 or 140 or 150, that doesn't really move the needle. It's just a budget line. And I say it's just, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that it's trivial dollars.
Yeah.
But, that we're not saying we're gonna spend it. If we were to change the 140 number, we'd have to go back to the CAB and do the sub process over again. So that's why I would suggest us to leave it at 140. I know that's an administrative piece, but you got the answer.
So it's just an astronomical number, right?
Massive.
I get it, right? Our budget's called 100 million. 50 of it's really operating costs, 50's buying electricity.
70-30, but yeah. You got it. I'm with you.
3x that budget, right?
It's massive.
Massive. I get it. So that's, I think, too big for our britches personally, right? I think that the only way I would be comfortable entering into that is if we partnered. We maybe not bond, but we partner with other munis, right? And you take that kind of approach to it if they're interested. 20 megawatts still isn't, to me, it's fuel cell, right? It's no matter what we're doing, it's fuel cell. We're burning gas, we're capturing the gas. There's some ancillary stuff. Okay, great. I just think asking for that when we're still in such a early state, I think it's I applaud that list right there.
Yeah.
But I think take that one line item out. And yeah, I'm willing to work with that amount of investment for next year. I know they want to see commitment from us.
Yeah.
Right, in order to move forward. But I just think that 140 is just really the us financing that could absolutely destroy Reading if it goes south. If that started and went south, that would wipe us out. And if it didn't go the way we thought, take all your cash reserves and take, basically non-existent anymore.
Before you respond to Bob, can I chime in on this a little bit? Because I'm coming at it from basically the same point of view, but with a slightly different take.
Yeah.
Which is that, as I have understood over the last few years, the GM has, if you're not all powerful, you're close to all powerful. Once we put things in the budget, you do have the unilateral ability to go into contracts for power supply. And yes, you've been good about coming to us for votes, and it hasn't always been the case that the board was affirmatively involved in every, operational decision. You do have the power under the law, once we put it in the budget, to go do all these things without us necessarily having that, okay, let's stop and look at each piece and vet it and make the decision. So
Go ahead, finish.
So I'm more comfortable with, okay, let's do one thing at a time. And when you need more money, CAB has already approved this magnitude, so it's not like they're going to object. But we want to look at each thing and if we need to add to the budget, we'll add 10 million at a time, 20 million at a time, when we know exactly what it's for and that we have a deal. And I think these private parties know, we're serious about these things and we have the ability to back it up. But to just give a $140 million capital budget increase is not something I'm comfortable with.
Okay, so let me just make sure, so I hear you, right? And I appreciate it. So I hear you. Yeah, absolutely. I guess technically I could spend it in 10,000 or $10,000 blocks, but remember, anything above $50,000 I have to come to you anyways. So no, just hear me out.
But I don't know if that's actually,
Well, this is not power. This is all asset purchases, right? And I literally, you guys have to approve power supply too. So literally,
the fuel cell is not considered power supply,
it's an asset.
but it's power generating. It's a generation capacity.
So,
I just don't see why we have to do it now versus when we have
Here's why.
a vetted project that we all understand and are comfortable with and have seen all of the options and downsides. Then we go and add it to the budget.
So one of the requests this is just clarification of process. So, while the GM has a lot of leeway to run the operations, he doesn't have the ability to write a $140 million check. Hell, he doesn't have he can't write $1 million check. Can't. Right. No, just literally does, has to come, for these big ticket items, has to come before both the CAB and the Board of Commissioners. Step one. Step two is, back to managing risk. It is a big number and it's not, I told you, it's not lost on me. And I've shared this with you very openly of the whole group. we're trying to find solutions. We have, go back to Bob's point in terms of working with partners. There are other MLPs that are very interested in potentially doing something with us. But again, they're not next door to us. So, if it makes it, we might go, so we have had, there might be a scenario where we say, look, we're going to do 2 of these projects simultaneously, and there might be some dollar benefits for doing that, and it works in the state. So there's another large MLP, there's a couple of them, but they'd be large as well. So that's part of the process as well. We are not able, so one of the requests, so we did the comparative analysis, right, on these different technologies. One of the other suggestions that came out of the board was maybe we do an RFP, right? But I can't do an RFP unless I have dollars in the budget for that RFP. And we know that this is process that I'm not setting, right? But collectively, if it's not in the budget, I
don't know if that's true, that you can't do an RFP that asks for proposals, that if we like the proposal, then we go forward and then we fund it. I don't know if that's categorically true. I just think it's worth.
Yes, to write an RFP, you need a scope. To define the scope, you need budget that sets the engineering and the parameters. So one of the problems with this technology is it's not standard scope. So you're going to be writing something that's going to be targeted to a limited number of technologies. You still need to start.
So Dave, how about this? So what we did on it, so I hear you, right? And literally, how I'm gonna operate.
So let me just interrupt.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Maybe we just add something in the motion.
Yeah.
At the end, it says no amount of the 140 million shall be contracted before receiving the approval of the CAB and the RMLD.
I just still think the $140 million, right now, without having, I don't have a project in my hand to look at, right? So I just think.
This addresses that.
No,
He can't do anything until he comes back to us with that contract.
No, but Joe, I guess what I'm saying is, when I look at $140 million, we're gonna spend a third of that on a brand new substation that's gonna generate a heck of a lot more than 20 megawatts, right? I know we're taking power from it, but this is for generation. So I just think that, if I'm looking at, $7 million a megawatt for generation, right? That's a gigantic number to me. I just think it is. And,
so I'm not asking you to approve a project.
well, then let's, see how we progress. If you think that you need the money.
I'm asking you to allow me to progress more deeply at this point in time.
Yeah.
And-
Okay.
And putting a line item in the budget will allow me to do that this year as opposed to wait till 2025.
Then I think we turn around, and I don't think $140 million is something I would ever want to approach right now. Maybe we take a portion of that and move it forward. I'd be
you have
more
a number in
comfortable with that. Well, if I'm thinking, the one thing that looks good to me on the that you've discussed so far tonight is the long
battery.
duration, is the battery. We take a look at the battery, you take a look at those couple other projects that are on the board, the land procurement,
That's a given, everything that's in play.
the other one, the Linfield one, which I think is another great idea. It's actually short money to prove out a concept.
Yeah.
I think, but just blanketly saying $140 million, I think that's maybe it's just numbers to me that it's just shocking me, but it's so big relative to what we are. I just don't.
Yeah, I would add, aside from the dollars, that I just like your perspective on, is just I love the innovation and the ambition, right? It's a lot of different projects that are all new to us, right? Can we actually thoroughly vet and assess all of those at the same time?
We're not gonna get them all done. Some of them are gonna follow the wayside. So we're trying to keep the pipeline, this is standard, whatever kind of company you're running. You got projects, and a couple of them come to the bottom. Each, to answer the question, we need to be moving as quickly as we can. We are trying to work with partners so that it's not, it's not all internally developed. Again, I'm not asking for approval to do the project. So what my recommendation would be, then take the $80 million out, and just, I'm doing this real time here. So 40, 50, $60 million, it's going to cover the other ones. We'll put at the very back of it the same thing we did with the motion on the fuel cell, and say with final contract approvals under separate and subsequent motions. Whatever we can wordsmith any way you want. But
So you're, to the gist of it is you're removing the top one, the carbon captured fuel cell, off of that table and then asking us to approve the CapEx
and
increase
so-
except for that one.
well, I mean I'm trying to figure out a mechanism to allow us to continue to move the stuff forward. I will try and figure out a way to keep the carbon capture moving forward.
With
And
the,
I mean that seriously. There's no antagonism. I'm trying to figure out the process.
Can I suggest flipping that? I mean, if the concern right now is you can't move forward in a significant way to further vet the carbon capture fuel cell option, isn't that the one that you need? And I don't know if you're still gonna have heartburn over 80. I can understand if you did, but
It would
Um,
be 60 though. It would be
but-
60, not 80 left.
No, the-
I'm looking at 80.
There's still 80 left.
So what I'm saying is, like, the sense of urgency is the sense of urgency on the other items as well, or is it just on the 80 because you really can't move forward with the 80? You can't move forward with anything without having approval on the 80.
Well,
You already have approval on the 125. You already have approval on the Maple Meadows.
Yeah.
You know what you're getting into when it comes to the solar array.
well,
So what
the
you're
reality
really
is,
asking is
you know,
for
that's fair.
us to
Okay. So, if we want to look at it that way, that's not how I structured it, but if you want to take the the Maple Meadow Energy, the solar array itself, that 30 million, we could take that off. Because that's not going to happen until 2025, 26 anyway. So that's not, you just look at it, look at column 2024, not required. Because I'm not going to come to you guys with a proposal until 2025 at the very earliest, because again, it doesn't make any sense because I don't have clear land.
Yep.
So out of that 140, we could take the 30 off. That's 110. And again, I'm not.
And again,
I'm
you
trying to
already
get
have
comfortable.
you already have the 6 and the 3. So frankly, you can take that off
Take
this
them off,
list
yeah.
too.
So take off.
You
40,
take
so
10,
100.
take off another 30. You're at 100 and don't go down.
Yeah.
You want a 2-digit number, not a 3-digit.
It's this,
It's just big.
it's big, but if you think,
Right, no matter how you say it.
is it,
Yeah, it's
you're
not-
gonna go out to an
all we're
RFI.
Voting here is just the line item. We're not voting to spend this money.
Correct.
I mean, that's why I think we should add at the end, just no amount shall be spent.
But Bill, I don't want to
contract.
put my name on $140 million. I mean, I
Well,
Gotta
do
go
think,
back and get it approved from us. That's
Well,
what I'm saying.
why don't we put $1 billion, it
Because-
just makes,
because
then put funding, then put the word funding, up to whatever, I just think that,
And I know, right? I understand the perspective, right? The 140 isn't just a, pick a number.
yeah.
I mean, there's a logic behind why we got to that number. So I mean, I know you know that, but just for the benefit of everybody.
Ray, you want to say something?
well, I mean, let's try to get a number which allows us to move forward, but we've already seen models today where by 2029, we may have shortfalls. And if we're going to wait to 2027 before we decide we're going to invest in something that takes 3 years to put in, we're not going to get there. So we need to invest now in order to get to 2029 where we don't have to turn the lights off. And yes, investing in capital is a capital expense and it's a big number. As long as we have the checks that Phil suggested, that we come back as we hit these milestones and get approval for the projects going forward, we're going to have to invest. And the capacity of RMLD is going to double over the next 10 or 15 years, double. So take 100 million that we're spending now, you're gonna be looking at a $200 million budget before long. So you can't look back and say, oh my God, we've never spent this money before. You're right, we've never spent this money before, and we're never gonna spend as little as we're spending now going forward. So put whatever checks along the way you want. I think Phil's suggestion about coming back is a good one. Tweak it down if we feel better about 120 or 110 or 99.50. Fine. I mean, we don't maybe have to assign the budget of 28 million in 2027 in this meeting, and then take the other 6 out. That gets us down to 19,995. Then that's a number that still allows us to work over the next couple of years toward
Make it
a
90
project.
million. And we'll make it work. I mean, again, we're gonna come back to you over and over again. Can't be zero.
It can't be zero, and I get, and we can't just use the past to limit us going forward. We're gonna double.
Okay,
I was just gonna say, I think my point is, let's focus and approve things that we need to do now to move forward, to keep to that pace that you're talking about. And there are things on this list that are either frankly rounding errors.
Yeah.
Or things that we don't have to allocate now. And if we allocate 80, or not even allocate, if we allow you to pursue investment in something that is potentially $80 million by putting it in the budget, it may come back where we're not going to do that. And we reallocate that to Maple and Meadows elsewhere, and you never have to actually increase the budget.
You can ask for more money again.
Right, you ask
As things progress, right?
Give me a number.
I will give you a number. My, and I'll say why it's the number, is not 140, but 60. And the piece I want to hold off on now is implicitly saying we're green lighting this large carbon capture fuel cell project, which I feel needs a lot more vetting and understanding. And even giving that number in now basically says, yeah, we're kind of good with this. And I'm not good with it right now. So I don't know why I'm asked to put it in the budget. The other pieces I am good with. I think they've been discussed a long time. Some are already in the budget. They're well-proven approaches and or they're small dollar figures. This 80 million for the carbon capture fuel cell, I mean, I didn't go on the field trip, but I understand that the carbon capture that was seen was carbon capture out of the exhaust stream of a combustion plant. That's not what this would be. This would be carbon capture out of a steam reformation process of natural gas on the intake side. So it's not even, we were taken to see an example that isn't what would be built here. So that's just one indication of where are we seeing the carbon capture from the steam reformation process that also, so that we didn't see, and that works at this scale from an MLP, and that there's a market for that compressed CO2, and understanding all of the energy penalties for the storage, compression, transportation of the CO2, and that there's a market. There's so many pieces to it. And because at the end of the day, as we heard from the presentation, the actual energy efficiency of this, of the energy out of the natural gas, is around the same as a modern conventional combined cycle natural gas combustion plant. It's not like we're getting 80% out of the gas. We're getting the same 50 or plus that we get at a combined cycle. So it's like, it's this huge apparatus with all this extra add-ons that we haven't seen work anywhere. So I don't know why I'm putting 80 million in the budget for it. So my number is 60 explicitly for all the other stuff and not that one at this time.
So you 60 or 50?
Whatever it is, if you take out the carbon capture fuel cell until we fully understand it and understand all the options and understand all the pieces.
The 60, you come with that?
If that's what it is, taking out the carbon capture fuel cell. Yes.
62.
Okay.
What I would say is I definitely hear all of those points. I don't think that addresses what Greg is asking, which is he needs something to move forward to continue to explore that. So I think if we're saying no, we're not going to approve.
Why do you need money in a capital budget just to have conversations? We could have at any meeting, if we can do it today, we could do it next Thursday or the Thursday after that. We can.
I think what he said was, and actually what we explicitly requested at a prior meeting was to conduct an RFP process so that we are sure that that we fully vet the solution, we go get as many proposals as we possibly can and make sure it's the best possible, most cost effective
Yeah.
solution, which I fully agree with. I trust him when he's saying he has to get a budget to do that. So if we're saying no to the 80, I think we're saying no to the RFP process. My point was,
That part I don't get.
there are certain things, and I don't know if that's true. Maybe we need to investigate that to confirm if that's true or not. But I think my point is, let's focus on the things we have to allocate some budget for to continue to pursue. To me, that's if we want to do the bid process and we require budget for it.
Yeah.
It's the carbon capture fuel. So it's 80 million there. It's the long duration battery, which is 9 million. And then I don't know as much. I think we talked about the Linfield H2O. I don't know when we last talked about that. I might just be forgetting. Okay, so obviously I got to go back and revisit my notes there, but then there's 7. So to me, it's 96. That's what those are the key projects that we need to continue to move forward. The other stuff is rounding errors that we should get in the standard capital budget. And then there's Maple Meadow, which we don't have to do right now.
I guess the piece in all of this discussion is where is maybe it's a legal opinion to tell us that if we don't have money in a capital budget, it's impossible to put out an RFP. I just don't think so. I don't know if that's true. And given that we can at any given meeting, we already have CAB pre-approval, that any meeting, if we can just go add money to the capital budget. Well, if we like the RFP, we add money to the capital budget. I don't know why it has to be before we issue an RFP. I want to know from some other.
Wait till next meeting to make a comment on this, or do you have an opinion right now? Okay.
We're not authorizing building.
No.
Right, you need money to
Yeah, I mean, so you don't need money to talk to somebody.
right.
You don't need money to, we go out for an RFI for.
Exactly.
I think we're looking at this like a transformer, right? So we need money in the budget to buy transformers. Okay, great. We requested a transformer, we budgeted that money. Well, here your
Yeah, but
RFI,
just on those school projects, on a transformer, we can't do a bid process for a transformer unless it's in the budget.
Right.
that's what I just said. This isn't a piece of material purchasing. This
Right.
is a concept. You're just talking to somebody right now. And if we do decide to ever enter into any type of contract, they're gonna put it on the table. Not to preclude, I don't think anything stops you right now from pursuing anything. I really don't. I don't think you have to have a budget, but I mean, I think.
Well, I will need a budget for the long duration battery. So the number's not 0.
Yeah.
So whether it's 60 or 90, just whatever you
Yeah,
guys feel
right.
comfortable with.
I think that,
And we'll get back to you next month and trying to figure out. And again, there's no, I'm not frustrated with you guys at all. Just that these are big numbers. We gotta be careful. I want to make sure we do it. So, and because they're big numbers collectively for all of us,
Right.
want to make sure we do it right. And I'm first and foremost. So there's no problem with me. Why don't you guys decide what you want? So I'm going to recommend you do 90 or 95, not 140, just to give me some flexibility. I will go back before the next meeting and confirm
So
what I have to do. And you can put the condition on it behind the Phil's thing. That's totally fine. But that's how I'm gonna do it anyway. So I think it's fine.
may I, Mr. Chair, one more thing? I think the initial I versus P hits on something. I know this, I can say confidently, a public entity can issue an RFI to have people come in and say, here are the types of things we could do in the orders of magnitude of prices, and here's what we've demonstrated. You do not need a budget to have the capital budget in order to do an RFI and have vendors come in and tell you things. You don't. And even an RFP, it's only when, like Bob said, when you're contracting for it, yes, I now want to buy your fuel cell system, then yeah, you have to have it in the budget. But yeah, and certainly if you're doing, we haven't done an RFI, right? We haven't done that. So let's do the RFI, and then when we understand all the options and then we understand the ranges, we can go to budgeting. But yeah, I don't even think I'm comfortable with the 90 million.
So.
Don't do
it-
0.
No,
Well,
it's
so,
zero.
but here's the question is, because we have to go back to the cab anyway. Would it be better for us to just hold on, I don't know what the term is, but essentially hold on the voting for this until we get an answer on.
Sure. That's great. Let's table
Well,
it.
since they
So
approved 140, it's implied that they've approved smaller amounts.
Yeah, well, they already approved it. Ken, you guys approved
Pam
on
was
40,
saying
right?
that we should defer
Okay,
this
no,
out.
so I don't think,
So did that go back to Pam?
I doesn't have
So
to go
that's,
back
okay,
to,
so that's a good important question.
they've already approved it, so
Yeah, I mean.
it doesn't have to.
I want to, do-
If they said 140 and then we turn around, we say, well, we'll do X out of the 140,
should be
that's
okay.
fine, up to,
I would
I think, I would think, yeah.
Okay, if that's the case,
We'll
then
keep it simple, I would say, if they did 140, I don't think our numbers have to match, you say, oh,
As
I
long as
didn't agree with
it's
that,
not
I
linear.
scratched, that's line
Yeah,
item
but-
veto,
Yeah.
you know. Power,
Yeah, I think it's the, right, you can't go higher than what they approved, but you could certainly,
If the minimum consensus of the group is 60, I think we should vote for 60. I think we need to advance the process.
I would agree
I
with
don't want to
Greg.
leave this meeting saying we're just going to put it on the table and not do anything.
And
If we can't get a consensus or majority or whatever
Yep.
the quorum requires to get to 96, then I would say, let's set the motion for 60. I personally would accept the comments that people have made, put conditions in the motion for coming back for expenses and go with the 96 number myself, but I would accept a consensus position on 60, allow the general manager to pursue those projects which are active and engaged, and give them some authorization to move forward. I just don't think we can just wait. We 2029 is not that far away, and our job is to keep the lights on and not doing things, and particularly not investing in the solar projects that are up there. No, we can't not do that. So
So we want to make the motion at 60?
Yeah.
I would
so-
go with that.
So let me read the motion, how I'm gonna, it should go. So it's a move to the RMLD Board of Commissioners on the recommendation of Citizen Advisory. Well, up based upon vote to accept the general manager's recommendation to approve an additional $60 million increase to the 2024 capital budget, a new line item potential in-territory generation and storage projects for commission in the next 5 years. No project listed as part of the 60 million shall be contracted for before approval by the CAB and the Board of Commissioners.
That sounds good to me.
And again, the 60 is to support.
Yeah.
Everything. Except.
Right.
The carbon capture fuel cell, with the assumption that we can do an RFI without the carbon capture fuel cell budget.
And we put that discussion on the next meeting. Further discussion on that at the next meeting. On the carbon capture fuel cell. I think there's questions. That's what we can and cannot do. Okay. Greg, you okay?
Yep, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you
Did
so
you
much.
get the motion? Did you get it? Okay,
Second.
okay.
Did you
I
have it?
assume Ray moved. Ray moved.
so moved.
Ray seconded.
I so second.
Okay. It's moved and seconded. Further discussion. All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, that motion carries.
We're gonna go real quick and keep the ball rolling. So general manager update, I'll do 3-minute summary. And then we'll go to. Okay, real quick.
Yep.
A lot of good stuff percolating. New director of HR is on board, and running. Actively recruiting director of engineering. We talked a little bit in the last meeting, we've talked consistently about communication. How do we improve the communication from RMLD out to our customers? We're kind of rethinking that, more the focus on education and marketing. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. We've got some reconfiguration of 230 Ash Street that's been in planning stages for 2 years. We'll probably get that executed this summer. Second round of grid modernization grant. That's a $31 million grant. We applied for it last year. They sent back some recommendations. One of them was to partner with an MLP. So back, Bob, to your point on the other projects. So we're doing it with Peabody Municipal Light Plant. It'd be roughly $21 million RMLD, $10 million M. We're both trying to do an AMI. So good thing. It's due in May. We hope to get back by the end of the year. That would net out $21 million. We have to match half of that. So net $10 million. There's another 10-hour, a different project, nickel metal hydride, different chemistry. The grant submission went out back in December. We're supposed to hear back on that first round in April. If we get that first round, we'll go back and do a more formal one. So anyways, we continue to work on grants, right? And that's a big, so there's the IRA 22 ITC investment tax credit and production tax credit stuff, either one or the other. we're gonna pursue those, but these are also additional funds, whether it's state or federal. So actively working on that. That's really good. Good news, I believe I shared this with you, but we have a fully executed LOI. Now, the LOI is non-binding. It's not, and I'll come back to you when we get to the point of the purchase and sale. But the seller requested that we do an LOI so that we could pursue our due diligence. So that started realistically, if everything goes, and there's a bunch of things we have to do, a lot of process, but probably by the end of late summer 2024 is probably realistic. Maple Meadows, we had a very good meeting with DEP. There's a path for us to get to a site ready for PV, kind of a major hurdle overcome. So it's going to take some time to work through that, but that's good news. We're probably relative to clearing the title. For us to move that ball forward, we will have to take an interest in the property. The way we're going to take an interest is an interim ground lease. I'll come back to you before we do that. It'd be $100 a year kind of ground lease. It would give us an interest, so we'll clear the title. Realistically, the ownership of that's not going to be 2025. It'll be late 26, 27. So pursuing that, it still makes sense. So et cetera, et cetera. Station 6. The good news is last December we got the ISO New England system impact study complete. That's really, really good news. In this year, I think we mentioned it on a different meeting, but we'll end up doing site prep. Transformers should arrive late this year. We're starting to do equipment orders, et cetera. That's making good progress. The initial commissioning was targeted to be fourth quarter of 2025 and then move all those circuits over by 2026. It's more likely to be sometime in 2027. We're working with the transmission operator in terms of their schedules. They've got processes that they need to work through. So that's the key driver of probably pushing that out 12 plus months. The question that should come up or that would come up is, well, what are we going to do in the meantime? You know, is Station 5 going to be okay? We did a pretty significant maintenance for the transformers and equipment at Station 5. Station 5 is one of the oldest ones. It's near end of life, but it'll run through 2029, 2030, given the load we have on it, et cetera. So we're not, the delay associated with Station 6 is not putting any customers at risk. There's no obvious additional risk by that delay. So that's a good thing. Small little note, so some of the transformer orders that we had put in, a year or more, some of them have come in earlier than we expected, which is a good thing. And then the last element is there's a lot of double poles and so there's a lot of work that needs to be done on poles. Because some of our digger truck is delayed in terms of delivery, we actually are we are renting a digger truck so we can get a little bit ahead of our poles. For this group, it's not a big deal, but it's nice for us to have a clean pole line as opposed to double and half hung. And anyways, we're doing pole line stuff. So anyways, those are real quick updates, generally speaking. A lot of momentum, things going well. That's it for me. Any questions on general manager update?
Okay. All right, so we got the warrant schedules in the agenda. See if anybody has any problem. Let us know. And our next meeting is April the 17th on a Wednesday. So
I won't be available for that meeting
okay.
unless you're going to have it in the Philippines.
Be nice.
Road trip.
You inviting us?
You're welcome to join me. Bring your high pressure tank, regulator, mask, fins. We're going underwater.
Oh,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, a quick question for you.
Sure.
In light of what you said at the beginning of the meeting, and then now knowing that Ray won't be at the next one, do you want to maybe we do the reorg now? I mean,
No, let's do it next meeting.
but just to press on it for 1 minute. Every for all the 10 years I've been on, we do it the meeting after the election at the beginning of the meeting, and it's fine that we did the whole meeting. But why wait till the beginning of the next one
It's
instead
not,
of now?
was not in the agenda. Was not in the agenda.
Okay, so not everything can be on.
Yeah, it was not listed in the agenda. So I understand what you're saying,
All right,
but it's not listed in the agenda.
The only thing I'll add to that, it does say at the bottom, the agenda does not necessarily include all matters. which may
You
be
know,
good to
it's
yeah, I mean, it's so typical that we do this all the time, and you do address it at the beginning that you want to discuss the I just don't know what the difference is. It just gets it done. Ray's not gonna be at the next meeting.
Okay, well, again, it's not on the agenda, so, you know, the public had noticed that they could be here to discuss it. Okay, I'm sorry. All right,
I don't, yeah.
Right.
Well, the gavel gets passed
And but
at the beginning of that other meeting, so.
Yeah.
What's the impact of adding it? Right now, I hate those questions, you never know the answer to
with
it.
all,
what do you mean the impact? Why not
Like,
just do it now?
if we do it now, is it a valid because it wasn't a motion?
yes,
I don't-
that's my concern, with all the hullabaloo that went up there. We do it now, I think you know, it would not be appropriate thing to do. We can do it the next meeting.
Should we consider rescheduling the next meeting then? So that all.
Yeah,
How about a quick meeting in a week to do
We-
it then?
we
How
could do
about that?
we could do that.
Okay.
I don't know how I can get to another meeting.
I mean, it could be a 15-minute like posted meeting, Zoom, and just to do it. And then,
No,
it- then
I
at,
think we should do it in person. Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
okay, 15-minute.
Do it in person.
I mean, given everything that's going on, I just think we should get it done. And
Yeah.
then, but yes, to your point about having it on the agenda.
Right.
How about a special 10-minute meeting whenever we can
Gotta be
do it?
2 weeks, right? So it would have to be,
Before the 12th.
it
As long
would
as
have
it's
to be the
before the
10th.
12th. 10th, I can do the 10th.
I would have to be Zoom. But I can dial in.
Yeah, and actually more people can attend Zoom meetings than can attend in person. So I don't think it needs to be in person.
Well, I've always preferred in person, my own personal feeling. So what are we looking at? We're looking at,
6 o'clock.
you want to do,
Tenth and sixth.
you want to do like
Zoom?
either the 3rd or the 10th?
I think you gotta do the 10th, right? You need, how many days you need posting?
I won't be able to
48
do the
hours.
third.
Yeah, 2 days.
They have to be the tenth, or it's something that week.
You could do it the 3rd because you have tomorrow's business day,
Will you be
The
back by
3rd.
then, Ray, on the 3rd?
3rd of April.
I don't leave until the 12th, so
don't
I'm
leave until the
around
12th,
until
okay.
the 12th.
Oh,
I'm
the
just
3rd. Could you do the
on
3rd?
17th.
We could
3rd
do,
or 12th?
Thursday's not good. The Wednesday's better.
The 3rd, Wednesday, the 3rd.
I
The
think
next
so.
week.
I can work with you to make it happen. Yes, I don't have coverage on month, so we can make it happen. Yes, we'll make it happen. We can make a third happen.
It looks very capable.
Pardon me?
It looks very capable.
Yeah, we'll get it done. If you guys want the third, 6 o'clock, we'll make it happen.
We could do it on April 1st, it'd be April Fool's Day.
No, they don't.
And then not have the meeting.
I will, I would have to be remote. Isn't that's right.
So is it third or 10th? What's your choice?
Third.
So the 3rd,
Third works for me.
6
3rd
o'clock?
works for me.
At 6.
Okay, and the agenda item is the organization of the.
Right.
VOC.
And you'll get the list of subcommittees out in advance of that meeting.
Yes, we will do that.
So that, because, you know, board subcommittees.
You would still keep the meeting on the 17th for all the other business?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'll clear up some housekeeping. So
that's fine.
unclutters that next meeting.
Like I said. just,
So Phil, actually, the list, it should, I have it in the packet, but the list of secretary, audit committee and sub audit committees are actually in your packet. So I'll make sure we send this out to you.
Yeah,
It's already
send it out
together,
to-
so we'll get it to you.
Yeah.
It was in the packet that came out, but we'll send it separately.
Okay.
It won't, and you won't see it till Friday.
Fine,
Thank you.
okay.
Great.
All right, and
Thanks, Phil.
the Citizen Advisory Board is April the 18th. That's still on. Mr. Talbot is the designee. On that
I'll
one.
break him the bad news. We took 80 million back from them.
Yeah.
That's a clawback.
Yeah. Clawed them
Okay.
off.
Wait, sorry, is that April cab coverage?
April cab coverage is
Me,
today. On the Citizen Advisory Board. The 18th. So. Yeah,
Sorry, so are these wrong? Are they not?
yeah, we got two different lists.
I have Coulter and then
We
I'll
got two
have
different
it.
lists up above. Isn't that interesting? Did you trade? I think the two of you.
I
traded.
I traded, I
Yeah, the
traded,
two of you traded. You traded April, May.
I traded April for May.
Okay, all right. So in April, it'll be colder. Sorry, Dave, you won't be going.
No, no, the cab, no, cab. I
We go to the
went,
cab meeting.
I went to,
So
When-
you're going to May.
I'm going to May.
You're going to May, okay.
So we have to.
So Dave's going to April, okay. Who's on first?
So I'm sorry, just to make sure that we give it to Erica. So that bottom table is okay as it sits?
Yes,
Okay, great, thanks.
okay. All right, with that, if we have nothing else. I entertain a motion to go into executive session, right?
Am I reading something?
Yes.
Is that okay?
yes,
Move that the RMLD Board of Commissioners go into executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 164, Section 47D. The exemption from public records and open meeting requirements in certain instances to discuss the development of security personnel or devices or strategies.
Deployment. Not development, deployment.
Deployment. Thank you.
Okay,
So corrected. Deployment of security personnel or devices or strategies with respect thereto relative to cybersecurity, the approval and release of executive session minutes, and the return to regular session for sole purpose of adjournment. Note, roll call vote required.
so in this case, we will go seniority, Mr. Talbot.
Aye.
Mr. Coulter. Aye. Des Larkins.
Aye.
Mr. Porter,
Aye.
Ms. Pacino, aye.